The Mafia boss heard every word she was never supposed to say. Bianca thought the phone call had ended. She thought Nico Bellini, the most feared man in the city, had heard only her sweet lies about his fragile mother resting peacefully upstairs. But the line was still open, and when she turned to the helpless old woman and hissed the truth, Nico stayed silent on the other end, listening as his future bride revealed the monster hiding behind her perfect smile. I had exactly one job inside the shadow-soaked walls of Nico Bellini's estate: protect the voice of a woman who could no longer speak. Donna Elena Bellini was the deaf mother of the city's most ruthless mafia boss. She trusted absolutely no one with her quiet signs. Just me. I was the invisible caretaker, a ghost in the dim corners of the room. I understood every heavy blink, every slight tremble of her frail fingers, every desperate warning buried deep inside those exhausted eyes. We existed in a world built on pure violence, but her silence, that was the loudest secret of all. Nico loved his mother far more than his bloody empire or the towering stacks of dirty cash. Every guard in that cold house knew he would never marry a woman. Donna Elena refused. That was exactly why Bianca, his fiercely beautiful but desperate fiancée, was rapidly running out of time. The grand engagement dinner was set for Friday night, October 18th, inside the Bellini mansion's vast dining hall. Under the glaring crystal chandeliers, Donna Elena would be publicly asked to bless the marriage in front of the entire crime family. Bianca was already sweating. She knew the old woman's answer was a definitive no. Sunlight faded fast on Thursday afternoon, just one day before the catastrophic dinner. Nico called Bianca, simply checking in on his fragile mother. She answered with a voice dripping in sickening sweetness. The exact same performance she always put on whenever the boss was on the line. She spun a gentle lie, told him Donna Elena was resting peacefully in her dark room. Everything was completely under control. The upcoming evening would be utterly flawless. Slowly, the beautiful liar lowered the phone. She placed it face down on the polished mahogany table, genuinely believing the connection was cut. But the line was wide open. Nico was still breathing quietly on the line, just listening to the silence of the room. My name is Sophia. I am speaking to you now long after the ashes have settled, sitting inside the very same empty mansion where that single, careless phone call shattered our lives into dust. The venomous words Bianca spat into the room next, and the horrifying truth Nico absorbed through that silent receiver, brought the entire crime family to its knees. Stick around as this tragedy unfolds. Watch the fallout until the bitter end. Hit subscribe for more of our dark secrets, and drop a comment below telling me exactly where you are listening from. To truly grasp the blood and sorrow of that fateful Thursday, we have to go back to the quiet, desperate life I lived, long before any dangerous man in the Bellini family ever knew my name. I was not born into vast wealth, brutal mafia power, or the safety of armed guards. I came into this world inside a cramped, suffocating apartment right above a hot bakery. The stench of burning flour and cheap yeast constantly filled my lungs. We lived on a brutally narrow, shadowed street. Desperate neighbors knew the intimate details of your midnight, crying, and financial ruin, long before they ever bothered to learn your actual first name. The ghost of my mother still whispers in my ear. She promised to be back soon, just before leaving, to scrub filthy hotel rooms, until the bones in her knees literally gave out against the damp stone floors. My exhausted father drove a battered taxi through the dangerous city nights, sleeping away the daylight in a dark, quiet room. Wealth was miles away. Every single coin was counted, and yet our heads never lowered in shame. Sheer dignity was the only real armor poor people had, a lesson taught early on. We guarded it fiercely. Money could easily vanish in a single cursed month of bad luck, but your self-respect only disappeared when you voluntarily handed it over to the dark. By the time the heavy years pushed me to 32, I had never walked down an aisle, never worn a wedding ring. It wasn't because no man had ever asked for my hand in the dim light of a porch. It was because every single proposal carried a heavy condition I simply refused to swallow. A long time ago, I wore the engagement ring of a gentle, soft-spoken man named Marco. We were supposed to exchange vows just before the bitter winter frost closed in on the city. I can still picture the plain white dress I carefully picked from a dusty shop window. He had worked his hands to the bone, saving every crumpled bill for a tiny apartment overlooking the rusted train tracks. It was certainly no sweeping dream of wealth, but it was pure, honest for a brief, fleeting moment. That simple honesty felt just like salvation. But fate is a cruel director. Out of nowhere, the wet, black roads claimed the lives of my younger sister and her husband, in a horrific crash of twisted metal and shattered glass. They left behind absolutely nothing in this world. Nothing except their tiny, fragile newborn son Luca. Every single voice around me, from loud neighbors to quiet priests, told me to ship the crying infant off to distant relatives. They begged me to protect my own youth, to guard my own future, before the heavy chains of motherhood dragged me under. Even the warm, welcoming faces of Marco's family turned cold as stone. They declared that a young groom should never start a marriage burdened by another man's crying infant. To his credit, Marco tried desperately to anchor himself to me in the beginning, but the crushing judgment of the neighborhood slowly grew far heavier than his delicate love. His mother turned her back, completely refused to speak a single word in my presence. His angry brothers pulled him aside in darkened alleys, insisting I was a curse that would ruin his life forever. Everywhere I walked, the townspeople just stared at my tired face, like I had willingly invited a plague right into my own peaceful home. In the bitter end, our fragile engagement violently snapped in two. I simply stood in the shadows and let it shatter. Little Luca was never some heavy burden dragging me down. He was a sacred, unbreakable vow written in blood. I vividly remember the haunting first night I carried him across the threshold of my dark apartment. He wailed endlessly until the gray morning light crept through the blinds. I sat perfectly still on the edge of a sunken mattress, pressing his small shaking body against my chest. My legs were too weak to stand, my mind too terrified to even close my eyes. When his tears finally dried, his tiny warm fingers curled tightly around my index finger, silently claiming my soul. From the second his grip tightened on my hand, the ghost of my sister faded. I stopped viewing him as the tragic orphan she left behind. In every bleeding way that mattered, Luca became my very own flesh and blood. I was forged into a fierce mother long before I ever had a chance to be a gentle wife. After that defining dawn, I violently rejected any man's love that demanded I cast my little boy aside. My path toward the brutal, Blaney crime family was carved by absolute necessity. I didn't stumble into the life of a quiet caretaker by mere chance. Years before walking the marble floors of the Mafia estate, I scrubbed floors in a bleak care home down in the old church district. It was a deeply sorrowful purgatory, fragile. Forgotten elders were sent there to waste away after severe strokes, brutal accidents, and wasting sicknesses entirely hollowed out their bodies. They had been robbed of the mundane miracles most of us foolishly forget to thank God for. A ringing, clear voice, steady, unshakable hands, the effortless ability to hear a ticking clock, or the sharp speed of a witty comeback. I walked among ghosts who lived in total silence. Some were completely deaf to the roaring world. Others could understand every spoken word, but couldn't push a single breath past their paralyzed vocal cords. I watched desperate souls struggle, just to write their own names on yellowed paper. Clumsy, painful mistakes haunted every single day. I completely misunderstood the silent pleas of trapped minds. Hours slipped away inside a damp, windowless storage room, sobbing against cold mops, feeling utterly useless. But in the heavy silence, something shifted. I began to adapt. I absorbed the graceful gestures of basic sign language from a withered, retired teacher who had lived in total quiet since childhood. Training my weary eyes to read trembling lips took time, failing miserably at first. My focus rapidly sharpened, and then the deepest secret of all finally clicked. A desperate soul's eyes will always confess the truth, long before their fingers ever twitch. Very early on, it became clear that human anger lives quietly inside a single, white-knuckled fist. Raw physical pain hides in a sharply held breath. Deep shame reveals itself when a person simply refuses to look toward an open door. Over the years, my hands memorized the cold plastic of alphabet boards, the worn edges of picture cards, the desperate tapping of fingertips, and the frantic rhythms of blinking patterns. But most of all, the darkest truth of human suffering finally made sense. Silence is never actually empty. It is a heavy, suffocating atmosphere, overflowing with hidden meaning and screaming with desperate pleas. But only if someone in the room possesses the pure patience to truly listen. That weird knack for reading the unspoken is exactly why the Bellini crime family tracked me down. They didn't want another maid scrubbing marble floors. They needed a translator for a living ghost, someone to reach a broken woman this Mafia state had pretty much given up on. Life had trained me for it. By the time my Luca turned 8, I survived on permanently aching feet and a kitchen table buried under unpaid bills. I perfected the hollow smile, the kind that only surfaced when my boy was watching. Luca was painfully small for his age. He had these wild dark curls I could never quite comb down, and he had that piercing habit of asking heavy questions my tired brain could barely handle. Every single morning, as dawn bled into our freezing kitchen, he stood right there in the doorway. He watched me pack his lunch with eyes wide in absolute dread, asking me if working for the mob was dangerous. I swallowed the terror in my throat, knelt to his eye level and firmly told him no. Looking back, that was the very first mortal lie. I fed my beautiful son out of pure, desperate love. The terrifying truth was that nothing breathing inside Nico Bellini's house felt remotely normal. His mansion stood like a cursed fortress behind massive iron gates. looming high on a foggy hill over the city. Armed guards flanked every entrance like stone statues. Cold camera lenses were hidden where spring flowers should have grown. Whenever people spoke inside those walls, they used breathless, trembling whispers. They kept their voices low not for peace and quiet, but because every servant understood the unspoken rules of the crime family. Make a loud mistake here, and it would cost you something far more precious than your weekly pay. Acres of imported marble were always blindingly polished, reflecting crystal chandeliers like a sheet of ice. The heavy family silver was scrubbed down to surgical steel. Thick velvet curtains were drawn shut at the exact same hour every afternoon, killing the fading sun. To a blind observer, everything looked pretty much flawless. But 10 minutes breathing that sterile air taught you something else entirely. Perfection in this house wasn't beautiful, it was a deadly warning. I soon learned why they brought me into this gilded cage, to care for Donna Elena Bellini. The last 3 women had fled the property in absolute terror. Kitchen rumors were chilling. One maid claimed the suffocating silence of the master suite made her skin crawl. Another sobbed by the sink because she couldn't figure out what Donna Elena actually wanted. A third caretaker vanished into the night after just 1 week, refusing to explain her sudden departure to a single soul. I remembered their failures. I remembered, while the sour housekeeper interviewed me in the drawing room. Without a word, she slid a worn wooden board across the mahogany table. It was covered in faded letters, simple commands, and crude symbols. She stared right through me and asked if I could work with this. I stared down at the chipped wood and told her yes. Her eyes narrowed right away. She leaned in across the table, demanding to know if I had ever actually cared for someone, totally stripped of their speech and hearing. So I painted a vivid picture. I told her about the bleak concrete walls of the state care home, and say a grade teacher who forced my clumsy hands to learn the signs. I described a dying old man, fighting the nurses, with only 2 trembling fingers and fiercely stubborn eyes. I told her about a paralyzed stroke victim who survived with nothing, left but 1 agonizingly slow blink for yes, and 2 desperate blinks for no. The housekeeper didn't offer a single trace of a smile, but her stiff shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. She muttered that I might actually last longer than the others, a dark promise hanging right there in the heavy air. I needed this brutal job too badly to let my pride get offended. The salary was an absolute fortune, completely dwarfing any pathetic wage I had ever scraped together. Plus, I had a boy waiting at home. Luca desperately needed his school fees paid. He needed the bitter liquid medicine for his violently rattling asthma, and he needed proper leather shoes that didn't pinch his little toes raw. So I swallowed my fear and took the job. First morning, the housekeeper marched me down an endless corridor, stopping at a massive oak door in the east wing. Donna Elena sat perfectly motionless by a towering arched window. She wore a pale blue silk robe that seemed to swallow the morning light. Silver hair brushed flawlessly over one delicate shoulder, frail hands locked in her lap. At first glance, she looked incredibly fragile, the exact kind of broken porcelain figure cruel people whisper about. But the second she raised those dark, piercing eyes to meet mine, a cold shock ran right down my spine. I knew instantly, this silent matriarch was not weak. Not weak at all, just trapped, and there is a terrifying difference. True weakness means the fire is entirely dead, no strength left to fight, but trapped strength is a dangerous, coiled beast, bursting with power locked behind something incredibly cruel. Donna Elena lacked the physical ability to speak aloud, and she could no longer hear the rustling wind. Yet she sat in that chair and ruthlessly monitored every single detail of the room. She watched the nervous servants cowardly avoiding her gaze. She studied the armed guards who foolishly treated the mob boss's mother like just another piece of antique furniture waiting to be dusted. She watched arrogant doctors stand right in front of her, carelessly talking over her instead of to her. The room grew incredibly tense as I stepped forward, gently sliding the scarred wooden board beside her frail hand. She studied my face for a long, heavy moment, silently weighing my intentions. Then she raised a pale finger and tapped the wood twice. The housekeeper let out an impatient sigh and snapped that it meant thank you. Donna Elena ignored her entirely. Her intense eyes stayed firmly locked on mine, probing my spirit without breaking contact. I tapped the wood twice right back. Then I pointed to my chest, smoothly signing my own name using the hand motions I perfected at the state care home. Sophia. I mouthed the syllables as my hands moved. Her dark, guarded eyes instantly shifted. Nothing massive, just a microscopic softening of her sharp features. But it was absolutely enough. In that charged silence, I saw her genuinely look at someone in this terrifying house and believe a human heart actually beat beneath the starched uniform. From that moment on, I threw myself entirely into the deeply guarded secrets of her language. 2 sharp, hollow taps on the wood meant yes. 1 agonizingly slow tap meant no. and if she ever brushed her frail index finger against the silver cross at her throat, it was a dark warning. It meant someone standing in the room was telling a deadly lie. A tight fist resting on her knee meant she was fighting sudden physical pain. Dark eyes darting toward the heavy oak door meant she was suffocating and wanted the room cleared. Her pale hand, lying flat against the blanket, meant bone-deep exhaustion had finally taken over. A long trembling blink meant she was trapped in a dark memory she completely refused to show the world. The blind fools marching through the estate entirely missed these vital details. They thought caring for Donna Elena merely meant feeding her soup, buttoning her silk dresses, and making absolutely sure she looked like a flawless statue. Whenever the terrifying Nico Bellini finally entered the room, true care wasn't just medicine. It was listening to the heavy silence no one else could possibly bear. Nico arrived exactly at dawn, every single morning, stepping into the sterile light of his mother's room. It shocked me at first, watching him gently trace the bruised veins on her pale hand. Men of his violent bloodline were only discussed in suffocating whispers down in the break room. Nurses spoke his name like thunder that could shatter glass. Don Bellini, the untouchable phantom of the city. A ruthless mob boss who could suffocate an entire business empire with just one murmured call. The kind of man whose enemies dissolved into the cold harbor mist long before sunrise. The mansion air always thickened whenever Nico walked the halls. He dealt in absolute fear, yet his mother's doorway remained a sacred boundary. He always left his armed shadows out in the corridor. I watched from the corner as this terrifying boss stopped, knocked once, and waited. He never crossed that threshold until her dark, sorrow-carved eyes found his. Only then did the ruthless leader dissolve into a devoted son. Kneeling by her high-backed chair, he pressed his lips to her pale forehead. He would murmur good morning to his mama, a sudden softness breaking his rough voice. Her fragile hand would brush his sleeve, gently tapping twice a silent heartbeat of a language between them. In those fragile moments, Donna Elena slowly turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes were heavy with words trapped behind a wall of silence. She waited for me to become her voice. At first, I was completely terrified to speak. I feared Nico's piercing stare and his suffocating stillness. Even his quietest acts of kindness carried the edge of a blade. He wore violence like a second skin. Yet inside this room, the monster simply vanished. He never once rushed my hesitant translations. He never raised his voice. Watching him wait for her disjointed signs, I witnessed a patience bordering on religious devotion. Her shattered communication was never a burden to him. It was scripture. Tell me exactly, he would instruct. His commanding bark completely gone. I became the only bridge between his crushing guilt and her silence. Every instruction left my trembling lips. Eat, I relayed it. Sleep, I spoke up. But if she harbored bitter anger because he abandoned her yesterday, I had to strike the blow. I still remember translating her fury that very first time. The opulent bedroom turned to ice. That suffocating quiet bled right through the heavy wooden door. It paralyzed the two armed guards out in the hallway, their shadows locked to the floorboards, terrified of what might happen next. My heart hammered against my ribs, convinced my honesty just sealed my fate. I braced for the violence trailing his name. But Nico only looked at his mother, bowed his head. The feared Mafia boss vanished. A devastatingly guilty boy took his place. You are right, Mama, he whispered. Raw sorrow tore through the room, as he admitted he should have come. I stood frozen, staring at his lowered shoulders. In that fleeting second, the grand mystery of the estate finally unraveled. Donna Elena didn't hold immense power just because she carried a terrifying surname. She commanded this kingdom because Nico loved her with such tragic devotion. He willingly shattered his own pride, making himself painfully small to grant her peace. The Don only tolerated my presence because his mother trusted me first. That unspoken bond wrapped around me like armor inside those highly dangerous walls. Yet in a syndicate ruled entirely by paranoia, earning the Queen's trust made me a massive threat, especially to the wrong person. Bianca Rossetti was the wrong person. I still remember the absolute dread of the afternoon she glided into the foyer. She was dripping in blinding white silk, not quite a wedding gown, but the fabric clung to her figure like a terrifying premonition. Every single maid and armed guard, lining the marble hall, understood the silent violence of her wardrobe. It was a chilling declaration, a warning about the throne she fully intended to claim. She swept right through those heavy oak doors, wrapped in intoxicating floral perfume and the cold fire of diamonds. Bianca wielded a smile so perfectly engineered, even hardened older maids bowed their heads to her grace. Standing under the grand chandelier, she kissed Donna Elena's weathered cheek right in front of Nico. Her manicured fingers gently caged the old woman's frail hand. She looked up, declaring his mother completely radiant. The sheer relief washing over Nico's sharp features was a tragedy in itself. All the tension just bled from his shoulders. This man waged brutal street wars. Yet under his own roof, he desperately craved a fractured kind of peace. He just wanted the two women he loved to finally accept each other. But deception cannot hide from those who know the shadows. The exact fraction of a second Bianca's skin made contact. Donna Elena's knuckles turned stark white. Her fingers clawed deep into the velvet armrest. I saw that instinctual terror, and as Bianca's eyes flicked upward, she knew I witnessed it. The air instantly shifted. It locked us into a silent war. From that moment on, her angelic smile dripped with absolute venom. Whenever Nico was in the room, Bianca played the flawless saint. She brought towering arrangements of imported lilies, fretted over the lunch trays, delicately stroked the woolen blanket resting on Donna Elena's knees, cooing sweet words in a sugary tone that completely fooled the mansion staff. The second that heavy oak door clicked shut behind Nico, the illusion shattered. Bianca stiffened. Her angelic mask slipped, revealing the cold predator hiding underneath. She immediately invaded Donna Elena's personal space, stood uncomfortably close to the velvet chair, casting a suffocating shadow over the frail woman. With calculated malice, her manicured fingers slid the wooden writing board just out of the matriarch's desperate reach. Then she leaned in close. She spoke with slow, exaggerated enunciation, not to be understood by deaf ears, but strictly as a sickening power play. She fed on the twisted joy of taunting a crippled woman stripped of her voice. "He is going to marry me," she would hiss, standing by the antique vanity. She dragged blood-red lipstick across her mouth, met the old woman's reflection in the glass. "You can stare all you want," she murmured with dark amusement. Trapped inside her failing body, Donna Elena's trembling fingers clawed the empty air, desperately reaching for her displaced writing board. I couldn't watch this humiliation continue. I broke the stillness, stepped right forward to retrieve the old woman's only remaining voice. Bianca snapped her head toward me. Her eyes were dead cold. "Leave it," she commanded in a terrifyingly soft whisper. "She is tired." My heart hammered against my ribs. But the loyalty rooted deep inside me refused to bend. I placed the board right back in her hand. Bianca's painted lips curled upward, a hollow, venomous crack splitting her porcelain face. Looking into that terrifying gaze, a chilling realization finally washed over me. This elegant woman did not simply look down on me as a lowly maid. She was genuinely afraid of me. She feared the deadly power of my translation. Terrified I could actually read the unspoken horrors screaming in Donna Elena's eyes, exposing the absolute rot buried beneath the silk and diamonds. My voice was the only weapon capable of ruining her grand ascension. The strict rule regarding Donna Elena's ultimate blessing was woven directly into the foundations of the Bellini crime family. It was an ironclad law, one existing long before this nightmare ever arrived. Nico made his position crystal clear to the shadowed figures of his organization countless times. He swore a blood oath to never marry a woman his mother rejected. His men whispered it was some grand display of Sicilian tradition. The maids romanticized it as ultimate respect. But watching him stare at the floor in her presence, I knew the dark truth. It was raw, bleeding guilt. Donna Elena's world of sound and speech was brutally ripped away during a horrifying syndicate attack years ago. A violent night of shattering glass and endless blood. Nico, the fierce protector, was miles away when the wolves breached his home. He never forgave himself for that failure, carrying the crushing weight of her silence forever. To atone for his unforgivable absence, he transformed her bedroom into an impenetrable fortress, poured millions into private doctors, night nurses, armed guards, and foreign specialists, showered her with every luxurious comfort his blood-stained money could buy. Yet all the cash in the world couldn't stitch together the vibrant life she violently lost. Stripped of miracles, he handed her the only currency he truly understood: absolute power. He decreed no woman would ever share his throne unless Donna Elena personally blessed the union. A tragic, beautiful gesture of devotion from a broken son, but for a predator like Bianca, that sacred rule held absolutely no romance. It was just a locked door. To Bianca, the crippled mother was just an ugly obstacle standing between her and the crown. She didn't love Nico, not the way a woman actually loves a man. Her heart beat strictly for the terrifying weight of the Bellini surname. She was completely drunk on it, the sleek bulletproof cars idling at the curb before she even asked. She fed on the submission of armed guards, bowing to open her doors. She loved watching the local shop owners visibly tremble, their hands physically sweating. The second she walked inside, flashing Nico's heavy diamond, she craved the cold marble of the mansion, the endless flow of dirty money, the sheer crushing power of it all. But most of all, she worshipped the vision of taking her ultimate seat at the head of the table, to be crowned Signora Bellini. I spotted the dark rot inside her immediately. Poor women are forced to learn the ugly shape of hunger in all its twisted forms. My hunger was just a quiet, desperate plea to keep my son safe, Hers was a ravenous lust to own everything she touched. As the grand engagement dinner crept closer, a tiny crack finally appeared in her flawless porcelain mask. She started to panic at first. It just bled through in subtle, calculated shifts. She ramped up her suffocating visits to Donna Elena's velvet room, timing her entries for the exact moments Nico was locked away in Mafia syndicate meetings. She would glide in carrying beautifully wrapped bribes, fine silk scarves, heavy pearl combs, boxes of rich imported chocolates, things Donna Elena never even asked for, and absolutely never touched. When the elegant bribes failed to buy the old woman's favor, the venom turned right toward me. Bianca started cornering me out in the dim corridors, her voice dropping to a low, probing whisper. She demanded to know if the matriarch actually understood everything we said, asked if her handwriting was still clear enough to read, wondered if Nico could decipher her frantic tapping without me standing right there. If the medication made her tired, was it possible I could mistake a sign of approval for something else? She was hunting for a loophole, a way to forge a fake blessing. I kept my face completely blank, answered only in the safest, barest syllables. But her cold eyes tracked every single hesitation. One rainy afternoon, while Donna Elena slept under the heavy blankets, Bianca pinned me against the wooden wardrobe. She leaned in close and whispered, "You are remarkably loyal." I kept my eyes locked on my hands, kept folding that soft woolen shawl. I absolutely refused to give her the satisfaction of looking up. Bianca just tilted her head. The dim light caught the sharp, predatory angle of her cheekbones. "Loyalty is a pretty beautiful thing, Sophia," she murmured. She let the silence stretch out until it practically snapped. "But it does not pay a child's school fees forever, does it?" My stomach dropped. My fingers froze on the fabric for just a fraction of a second. Fatal mistake. Her red lips curved into this slow, terrifying smile. She found the crack, found the lock, and now she held the key. "Luca is 8 years old now." Yes, her tone was so light, so casual, like we were talking about the rain. A small boy, dark curly hair. "Don't say my son's name," I whispered. The words ripped from my throat, shaking with a terror I couldn't mask anymore. Her smile just widened, a chilling stretch of red reaching her dead eyes. "Then don't make me," she replied, a velvet threat sealing my fate. That night offered absolutely zero sanctuary. I never closed my eyes, just sat on the hard floor beside Luca's small bed, listening to the fragile, rattling rhythm of his breathing. His asthma always flared up brutally in the autumn cold. My trembling fingers hovered near his plastic inhaler, long after his chest settled into a deep sleep. The shadows seemed to mock me. I desperately tried convincing myself she was bluffing, that it was just some sick game. I tried reasoning with the panic, telling myself vicious women like her sprayed threats around like expensive perfume, lightly, carelessly, just because they enjoyed the intoxicating power trip. But the next morning shattered that fragile hope. Walking Luca toward the rusty school gates, the thick morning fog parted. A heavy black sedan idled right across the narrow street, tinted windows, but through the windshield I saw the driver. I didn't recognize the scarred face. And worse, when my terrified eyes locked onto his, the man didn't flinch, never looked away. He just stared, a silent messenger of death. Luca tugged at my fingers. "Mama, why are you squeezing my hand so hard?" he asked. "I am sorry, darling," I murmured. I brushed a dark curl from his forehead. I was just thinking about something else. Another heavy, crushing lie told in the name of love. A fragile shield, protecting his innocence from the monsters circling our lives. From that chilling morning forward, the borders of my world collapsed, shrunk right down into a suffocating tunnel of fear. My entire existence became a frantic triangle. Our tiny apartment, the school gates, the imposing stone walls of the Bellini estate, and back again. Every single step was a waking nightmare. Checking shop windows for reflections, scanning the busy streets. Totally paralyzed by the thought of that black sedan creeping up right behind us. The isolation was absolute. I could not go to Nico and beg the Mafia boss for protection. That paralyzing silence is something people who have never tasted true fear will just never understand. Standing up for the truth is incredibly easy when the person holding the knife has zero access to the beating heart of what you love. Bianca never needed to lay a single manicured finger on my boy to put me in chains. She just planted that agonizing seed in my mind, forced me to vividly imagine one crisp afternoon where the school bell rang, the children poured out, and my little Luca never walked through those iron gates. For 3 endless, brutal days, I lived trapped inside that horrific hallucination. My soul died 1,000 deaths. I thought I was masking the terror pretty well, but Donna Elena felt the shift in the room. Her dark, sorrowful eyes tracked my every movement with unnerving precision. She watched me far too closely. When I lifted the heavy porcelain teapot to pour her afternoon chamomile, my hands completely betrayed me. Trembling so violently, the cup rattled against the saucer. Later, Nico strode into the room, filling the space with his usual commanding aura. I immediately glued my gaze to the floor, terrified the crime boss would read the guilt right on my face. From her chair, Donna Elena tapped her finger against the wood just once. No, I slowly raised my head to look at her. She held my terrified gaze and tapped again, deliberate and slow. No, then, with a fragile hand, she reached up and pressed the small silver cross, resting against her collarbone. Someone is lying, please, I breathed. Not now. Ignoring my desperate plea, she stubbornly reached for her wooden board. Trembling fingers gripped the chalk. With agonizing effort, she carved out 4 shaky, devastating letters, L-U-C-A. The air violently rushed straight out of my lungs. I felt completely dizzy, hollow. How do you know? I choked out. A terrified tear spilled over my lashes. She didn't even try writing an explanation, simply stared at me from the depths of her quiet prison, and within the profound weight of that stare, I remembered the fundamental truth of her existence. Those robbed of their voices often see the world clearer than anyone else, silent witnesses to every hidden sin. Meanwhile, the grand engagement dinner was only 2 days away. The massive estate had become a machine of absolute chaos. Bianca glided through the bustling chaos of the estate. She carried the chilling entitlement of a queen who already conquered the castle. Discarding the florist's arrangements, she demanded rarer, far more expensive blooms, completely dismantled the delicate seating plan. Pushing Nico's most loyal Mafia soldiers away from the head table, she even marched right into the kitchen, boldly telling the head chef that Nico now preferred lighter sauces, a blatant lie, spoken purely to assert dominance over his life. Her arrogant reign eventually reached Donna Elena's chambers. She held up the elegant black gown I'd carefully prepared for the old woman's dinner attire. Her nose wrinkled in calculated disgust. She tossed it onto the bed, rejecting it without a second thought. Black makes her look far too severe. Donna Elena didn't even look at the discarded fabric. She slowly turned her weathered face toward me, her eyes burning with a silent defiance. Then she tapped her finger sharply against the armrest. A single resounding strike. No, a brief spark of rebellion flared right in my chest. I almost let a smile break through my fear, but the predator was watching my every twitch, swallowing hard. I forced my voice to remain perfectly steady. The blue gown, I announced, keeping my chin lifted. Donna Elena prefers the blue one. Bianca spun around on her expensive heels. Her angelic facade completely slipped, revealing the raw venom beneath. Did she actually say that? She challenged, her eyes narrowing to slits. I refused to look away. Yes. Bianca took a slow, deliberate step toward me. Be careful, Sophia. She hissed that I was starting to sound like I actually believed I was part of this family. The threat wrapped around my throat like a garrote wire. I immediately dropped my gaze to the hardwood. To a tyrant like her, looking away was a total victory. Sometimes the ugly reality of surviving just means playing the defeated coward. But deep in my bones, underneath all that trembling fear for my son, the embers of a cold, desperate rage were finally hardening into steel. I was totally done being a victim. The tension in the mansion hit a boiling point that Thursday afternoon, exactly 24 hours before the dinner. Nico was getting ready to leave the estate for a tense sit-down near the docks. But before stepping out, the mob boss came in to pay respects to his mother. The illusion of unity was perfectly staged the second he walked in. Bianca stood pressed against his side, her manicured fingers resting with sickening lightness on the dark fabric of his tailored suit. Across the room, Donna Elena sat completely motionless in her velvet chair by the window, bathed in the fading afternoon light, that heavy wooden writing board resting right on her frail lap. Looking at Nico, you could feel the sheer exhaustion radiating off him. Deep, bruised shadows painted the skin under his eyes, the heavy toll of running a violent underworld empire. Standing quietly in the corner, it finally struck me. Immense power was really just a more expensive, gilded kind of prison. The ruthless mob boss kneeled right there on the rug. Mama, he whispered. He told her tomorrow evening was incredibly important to him, his voice thick with a kind of vulnerability he showed to absolutely no one else. Donna Elena stared down at her ruined son, her face totally unreadable, completely still. Nico swallowed hard, the muscles in his jaw ticking. He said she knew what he had asked of her, and he would never marry this woman without her ultimate blessing. At the mention of that word, Bianca's knuckles went completely white, her painted nails digging sharply into his suit jacket. Slowly, agonizingly, Donna Elena shifted her gaze. She looked right at the beautiful, poisonous woman clinging to her son. Then, in a gesture colder than ice, the old woman simply looked away. Nico furrowed his brow, missing the profound weight of that dismissal entirely. But I translated the silent scream perfectly. It was a categorical rejection. Bianca felt her grip slipping. She launched a counterattack before I could even drag a breath into my lungs. She cooed that the old woman was just a little overwhelmed. That sugary poison sliced right through the heavy air, a sharp reminder that this was a massive night for the syndicate. Nico turned his exhausted gaze to the corner. Sophia, he prompted, waiting for my translation. My throat went completely dry. Bianca slowly turned her head. Her dead stare gutted me. I pictured the tinted glass of that black sedan. I could almost feel the phantom warmth of my little boy's hand gripping my fingers. But I also felt the crushing weight of the old woman's absolute trust. I whispered that she was simply tired. Ash coated my tongue. The sheer disappointment in Donna Elena's eyes practically broke me in half. Nico pushed himself to his feet. You could feel the deep exhaustion radiating right off the man. Faint light fought through thick velvet drapes, throwing harsh shadows across the bedroom. He leaned down, pressed a cold, restrained kiss to his mother's weathered forehead. Let her rest, he ordered, adding he would call later. Pure Mafia boss authority. He headed for the door. Bianca floated right beside him, wearing her flawless, caring bride mask. The heavy oak door clicked shut. The light vanished. I stood frozen in that suffocating room. The air turned to concrete in my chest. Donna Elena sat perfectly motionless in her wheelchair, staring dead ahead. Almost a full minute passed. She never even glanced my way. The only sound was the heavy ticking of an antique clock, counting down to absolute disaster. Finally, her frail fingers twitched. She tapped her lapboard exactly once. One single word. No, my legs gave out entirely. Pure despair dragged me down. I collapsed to my knees, right beside her chair. I am so sorry. The words scraped like rough sand in my throat. I am so incredibly sorry, madam. A violent tremor shook my entire body. Donna Elena lifted her paper-thin hand. It shook in the empty air, brittle as a dead leaf. I crawled an inch closer. My hands shook as I slipped the heavy fountain pen between her stiff fingers. She gripped it hard. Every single stroke across the paper was pure agony. Like that metal nib carried the entire weight of her tragic life. She managed a few crooked words. Is the boy safe? My heart violently seized. A sharp ache shot straight up my nose. I slammed both hands over my mouth, choking back a sob. I do not know. My voice was a shattered whisper. She slowly closed those cloudy eyes. The shadows deepened in the room. One murky tear slipped down her weathered cheek. Right then, every wall I had built completely shattered. And it was not because Bianca had practically promised to end my life. It was not fear of my own dark fate. What broke me was her. This frail woman had lost her voice, lost her freedom, lost almost everything she loved. And yet here, she put my little boy's life right above her own survival. That crushing weight of a mother's mercy sliced straight through me. Late that afternoon, the sun bled out of the estate, leaving a sick yellow twilight. High heels cracked against the floorboards. A lethal countdown. Bianca stepped back inside. Completely alone, I stood by the mahogany wardrobe, blindly folding sheets just to hide my shaking hands. Donna Elena sat frozen. Bianca strutted in, dripping with pure arrogance. She gripped a glowing smartphone. The bright screen threw twisted shadows across her flawless face. The storm was finally breaking. Nico was on the line, his low, gravelly voice bled through the tiny phone speaker. He asked how his mother was holding up. The second those words hit the air, Bianca's face completely shifted. It was genuinely terrifying to watch. The ice-cold sneer melted into a soft pout. Her rigid shoulders dropped. The calculating glare vanished, instantly buried under a flawless mask of concern. She is getting plenty of rest, my darling. She cooed right into the receiver, sickeningly sweet, absolutely perfect. Sophia is right by her side, taking wonderful care of her. No trouble at all. Nico murmured something back. The signal was weak, so I could not catch the words, but you could feel the dangerous gravity of the boss cutting through the static. Bianca let out a melodic little laugh. It floated across the bedroom like a poison-soaked vine, wrapping tightly around Nico's blind heart. No, darling, you have nothing to worry about. She purred the lie effortlessly. Tomorrow's dinner will go off without a hitch. Your mother will gladly give this marriage her blessing. Every single word dripped with toxic honey. My stomach turned completely over. The sudden nausea almost knocked me down. I glanced over at Donna Elena. Her bony fingers brutally twisted into her cashmere blanket, nails digging deep into the wool. It was the only way she could scream. Bianca quietly listened to the Mafia boss pledging his blind devotion. Then she softened her voice. I love you too, Nico. She lowered the phone. With one manicured thumb, she casually swiped the screen. Then she glided over to a marble side table decorated with blood-red roses. She dropped the phone onto the stone, with a sharp click. Those violent petals brushed against the dark glass, reeking of a fresh grave. The woman truly thought she owned the chessboard. She assumed that sweet lie of a phone call was over, but fate brought a brutal twist. The line was still open. Nico was still on the other end. That cellular connection was wide awake, ready to broadcast every dirty secret inside this bedroom. I had no idea the microphone was live. Neither did Bianca. She slowly pivoted toward me. The exact second she turned, her bridal glow completely vanished, like blowing out the only candle in a root cellar. Nothing left but freezing dark. Close the damn door. The order snapped like a switchblade. My legs felt like heavy concrete. I stood frozen. Close it. Sophia, she locked onto my eyes. Venom right on the surface. I had absolutely zero choice. Dragging numb feet, I pushed the heavy oak door shut, but I refused to back into a corner. I stepped right back, in front of the old woman's chair. The second the latch clicked, Bianca ignored me completely. She stalked toward the crippled matriarch, her steps vibrating with raw power. Towering over Donna Elena, she leaned close. Heavy diamonds around her throat caught the dying light, flashing exactly like viper scales. She pressed painted lips, right next to the old woman's withered ear. You are rapidly becoming a massive, exhausting problem for me, she hissed the threat. Fully aware, the deaf woman could not hear a single syllable. A pathetic, mute little problem. But the old mob boss did not flinch. Donna Elena just stared dead into the eyes of this plastic snake, burning with untouchable dignity. Bianca let out a dry sneer. She straightened up, slowly smoothing her designer dress. Then she snapped her head toward me, her eyes cutting like broken glass. Listen to me very closely. Tomorrow night at the table, when Nico asks his mother for her blessing, you will make damn sure she gives it. An iron grip locked tightly around my throat. I could barely pull in a breath of oxygen. My mind spun violently. There was absolutely no way I could force this proud woman to surrender. Drop the pathetic innocent act right now, Bianca hissed from the dark shadows. In this bloody family, you are her only voice, the only translation they have. If you announce she accepts me, Nico will swallow it whole. He trusts you blindly, but Donna Elena would rather take a bullet. Bianca read the sheer panic in my eyes. She stepped right into my space, heavy perfume choking my lungs. If the old hag refuses, you will translate it as a yes. The psychotic nerve of the order hit me like a runaway freight train. I snapped my eyes down to the black smartphone on the table. I still had no idea Nico was listening. I just needed a dead object to anchor my spiraling mind. Lying like that would be the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. She studied the sheer agony twisting my face, let out a short razor-thin laugh. Zero humanity. Just winter wind blowing over a frozen lake. You actually thought this blood-soaked Mafia compound ran on truth. She leaned in incredibly close. So close I could smell the rotting undertone buried beneath her expensive perfume. It literally made my head spin. Open your ears tomorrow night, in front of the entire syndicate. You look Nico dead in the eye and say she gives us her warmest blessing. If the crippled old bat fights back, you pin her wrists down, you force her hands into a yes. You sell the lie flawlessly. You smile, act deeply relieved. You are my puppet now. Do exactly what I say. Not one single mistake. I kept shaking my head. I could not stop. Hot tears burned my eyes. But the word clawed its way out of my throat anyway. No, I will never do that for you. The exact instant that refusal hit the air, every trace of amusement slid right off her face. A cold, psychopathic rage took its place. Well, since you are suddenly so brave, she whispered. I guess your adorable little boy will not be walking home from school tomorrow. Those words dropped like a live grenade. The oxygen instantly vanished from the bedroom. Even the heavy ticking of the brass clock seemed to freeze. Time went totally dead. Beside me, Donna Elena violently jerked in her wheelchair, her hands desperately clawing at the blanket. She knew the exact horror of that threat. The floorboards felt like they were ripping apart beneath my feet. Bianca watched the blood completely drain from my face, watched my knees practically buckle. A sick, deeply satisfied smile stretched across her painted lips. The blade had finally found the artery. That sweet little kid with the blue backpack. She hummed the description like a lullaby. Beautiful, soft dark curls. Her voice slithered directly into my ear. Every single afternoon, he waits right by that rusty iron gate on the left side of the courtyard. The tragic part. He only stands there because he likes watching that vicious guard dog chained up across the street. You see, Sophia, once we map out the highly predictable routine of a working mother, making a vulnerable kid vanish in this filthy city is vastly easier than crushing a cockroach. I opened my mouth to scream. Nothing came out. Black terror cemented my throat shut. My body stood totally paralyzed in that dark room, but my mind was completely ripped to shreds. I was already miles across the city, hovering right over Luca's crumbling elementary school. I could physically hear that chaotic afternoon bell ringing. I pictured a massive wave of children pouring onto the sidewalk, mentally clawing through the crowd, desperate to find the one little face that kept me alive. The sheer panic of losing my child chewed right through my sanity, and the Mafia bride was not quite finished. Think you can run crying to Nico and play the righteous savior? You are dead wrong. Her lips curled into a vicious sneer. I will weep right in his arms. I will tell him you are a deeply unhinged woman who deliberately twisted his mother's frail hand gestures. I will say you poisoned the old woman's broken mind with paranoid delusions about me. I will make absolutely sure he believes his mother's brain is completely gone. I will tell him you exploited a crippled mute to secretly seize power over this entire compound. He will never believe those lies. The words spilled out in a pathetic, broken rasp sounded entirely too weak. Even to my own ears, Bianca tilted her chin down, studied me like rotting garbage stuck to her designer shoe. Are you entirely sure about that? Learn your actual place. You are a maid. I am the woman walking down the aisle to share his absolute Mafia throne. Having delivered that lethal blow, she dragged her dead, mocking eyes away from me. Her gaze locked right onto Donna Elena. The old woman was visibly trembling, now vibrating with pure, white-hot humiliation, and the absolute best part of my plan. Bianca whispered it like venom. It is that the once terrifying underboss of this crime family cannot even open her mouth to defend your pathetic little life. The sheer disrespect was staggering. Hearing herself degraded like that, Donna Elena's fragile body suddenly surged with impossible adrenaline. Her frail arms snapped off the armrests. She lunged desperately for the wooden alphabet board resting on the table, her one remaining lifeline to the outside world. But Bianca was vastly faster. Like a starving hyena, the younger woman lunged across the marble, viciously snatching the battered wood right out from under the old woman's shaking fingertips. Bianca clutched the board tightly against her flawless silk chest, smiling with absolute, unhinged triumph. The little mime routine is officially over. No more pathetic little love letters for your son. She practically moaned the words, completely drunk on the power trip. No more secret warnings. Stop pretending you have any actual power left in this house. That disrespect finally snapped my fear. I lunged forward, give it back. Or what? You are going to put your hands on me. She threw the threat back in my face, dripping with arrogant disgust. Both my hands curled into tight, violent fists. My nails dug so hard into my palms they almost drew blood. I wanted to absolutely destroy her. I wanted to rip that beautiful, plastic mask right off her skull. But right as my sanity was about to snap, Luca's smiling face flashed behind my eyes. I pictured that pitch-black sedan, with the heavily tinted windows creeping slowly past his playground. I suddenly felt the crushing weight of every terrified mother in history. Women who had to swallow their own, screaming pride just because the monsters held the keys to their child's bedroom. That ancient, suffocating powerlessness slammed into my spine like a freight train. It completely broke me, very slowly. My white-knuckle fists began to uncurl. My arms dropped totally limp at my sides. Bianca watched my soul leave my body. A sick, victorious grin split her face, spun around on her expensive heels, and sauntered over to the massive mahogany bookshelf. Stretching up on her toes, she slid the alphabet board onto the absolute highest shelf, perfectly visible, but completely, eternally, out of the crippled woman's reach. The truly vicious ones know exactly how the mind breaks. That is what makes them so terrifying. They do not just strip away your survival tools, or final shreds of dignity. They mount those stolen pieces right in your line of sight, forcing you to stare every single second, knowing you can never grab them back. Dangling hope by a thread is vastly crueler than a clean bullet. Remember this, Bianca threw the threat over her shoulder like a death sentence. Tomorrow night, at the Mafia family dinner, you hand over exactly what I want. It is the only way your son gets to keep breathing. She did not spare us a second glance. Gliding toward the massive brass mirror, she admired her wicked reflection, slowly tucking a blonde curl behind her ear. Then she strolled to the marble table to casually pick up the phone, and in that fatal second, she finally noticed the glowing screen. Time shattered. Bianca stopped dead, her arrogant posture locked up, freezing into a monument of pure panic. The call timer on the screen was still ticking, delivering the fatal truth. The line was never cut, still connected. She pressed the receiver to her face, Nico. Her voice dropped into a violently shaking whisper, carrying a raw loss of control she had never shown. The speaker gave back nothing but suffocating silence. Every drop of color drained from her cheeks. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. Right then, the call disconnected. The screen flashed black. She stared at it like a drowning woman. After an agonizing pause, she turned toward me stiff as rusted metal. We locked eyes, and everything clicked. Nico heard it all. Bianca knew it too. But the twisted look blooming on her pale face was far more venomous than fear. Pure, cold-blooded calculation. A frantic reptilian logic spun behind her bloodshot eyes. If that man actually heard any of that, her voice was terrifyingly calm. That icy cruelty froze my blood. When he starts raging, you will swear to God, I was just emotional. Swear you misunderstood me, that I spoke out of panic. Whatever I tell you, you will repeat it like a good dog. Donna Elena stared daggers at her. The silent fury in the old woman's eyes could have burned the estate to ash. I stood frozen, lips glued shut. Bianca took another step, breathing hot against my ear. Do not forget your son's pathetic little life. She whispered the curse, with a haughty turn. She marched out, heels clicking sharply against the marble. The heavy oak door slammed shut. The muffled thud severed two different worlds. My bones felt completely hollowed out, feet nailed to the floor. That open phone line instantly obliterated the fragile power balance of this Mafia stronghold. My brain plummeted into pure panic. Was Nico hearing the truth, our holy salvation, or a death warrant accelerating us toward a bloody slaughter? Then a frantic knocking echoed. Donna Elena. Her withered fingers hammered relentlessly against the wheelchair armrest. I snapped out of it, stumbling toward her. "I know, ma'am, I know." I choked out the words. She struggled to lift her trembling arm, pointing right at the top of the bookshelf. I ran over and dragged the alphabet board down. When Donna Elena gripped that heavy pen again, the trembling was worse than before. Violent shocks sent painful spasms right through her fading body. Her first few attempts shattered, just frantic scribbles, twisting across the wood. Seeing her agonized struggle, I grabbed both edges of the board. I used every ounce of my own strength to hold it dead steady. I had to give her a solid anchor to carve out the sentence deciding both our lives. Finally, she forced out the heavy words, "Did Nico hear everything?" I looked up, staring past her frail shoulder at the heavy oak door. "I think so, ma'am. He must have heard it all." My voice was incredibly weak. Hearing that, the old Mafia matriarch slowly closed her eyes. For the first time since I met this iron-willed woman, a terrifyingly conflicted look crossed her face. Her fragile hope for the truth actually scared her more than the fear itself. Because when you survive in the dark for that long, hope is the deadliest poison. During that suffocating wait, the sprawling estate slipped into a bone-chilling silence. No thunderous roar from a furious boss. No heavy boots of armed enforcers sprinting down the halls. No doors shattering under his rage. The shadowy mansion just felt like a massive beast holding its breath. That unnatural quiet clamped around my heart like cold iron. Honestly, it terrified me way more than actual gunfire. My mind kept screaming at the empty walls. If Nico heard Bianca's vicious threats, the brutal humiliation of his own mother, why had he not stormed the gates like a demon out of hell? He was a ruthless crime boss who butchered anyone who crossed him. Why no raging phone call? Why were the walls not shaking? The suspense was pure psychological torture. A brutal hour dragged by, then a second, and Bianca, the woman who had just threatened everything, she never came back. To stop the panic from swallowing us whole, I clung to a fake routine. Moving like a ghost, I brewed Donna Elena's afternoon Earl Grey tea. I carefully fed it to her, sip by agonizing sip. I fetched warm water and gently wiped her exhausted face. The whole torturous time, I clenched my jaw so hard it physically ached. Under her knowing, tragic gaze, I poorly pretended my violently shaking hands were steady. Just as the clock struck 6, my phone buzzed, a sharp, violent vibration in my apron pocket. The screen flashed the private number of Luca's school. My heart completely stalled, fingers totally numb. I took a ragged breath and hit answer, crushing the speaker against my ear. "Miss Sophia." The school secretary's flat voice carried zero emotion. "Please do not worry," she said. "Your son is perfectly safe. A driver from your employer's estate just arrived to pick him up." My blood turned to freezing sludge. "What driver?" "A man named Carlo." The secretary said Mr. Carlo registered at the gate, claiming Mr. Bellini sent him for the boy. Her calm voice sawed at my nerves like a rusted blade. I gripped the phone until my knuckles turned dead white. I screamed right into the receiver, "Absolutely. Do not give Luca to anyone." But Sophia, the secretary, hesitated, terrified of the name. "Mr. Bellini himself is here." The breath left my lungs. My brain went to pure white noise. "What did you say?" "He is in the principal's office right now." My knees dissolved. I slumped against the heavy desk, cold sweat soaking my shirt. "Put Luca on the phone immediately," I snapped. A single second later, my son's sweet, trusting voice cut through the nightmare. "Mom," I just squeezed my eyes shut. "Luca, baby, are you okay?" I swallowed the jagged lump in my throat, forcing my voice to stay dead steady. "I am fine, Mom," he chirped. He said a really tall man came by. My boy had zero fear in his voice. "He even bought me a ham sandwich. Said you were busy, so he was keeping me company." Hearing him safe, knowing a ruthless mafia boss was buying my kid, a sandwich completely broke me. Hot tears spilled down my cheeks. "Listen to me, baby. Stay right there in the office. Do not go anywhere with anyone, unless I call you back. Understand?" "Okay," he promised. Then he paused. "Mom, are you crying?" "No, baby, I am not crying." A desperate, heartbroken lie. "I love you. I love you too." "Mom," the line clicked dead. I stood there, totally hollowed out. Then I turned my head. The old woman in the wheelchair was watching me. I faced her, tears still spilling. My throat felt lined with barbed wire as I pushed the words out. "Nico is at Luca's school." Donna Elena jolted. Her frail hand flew to her chest. I could not tell if it was sheer terror or a strange kind of relief. By the time pitch black wrapped the estate, Nico's armored car slipped quietly back into the courtyard. Luca was already secured in a Bellini family penthouse. Sweet Rosa, who had cared for Donna Elena for years, was watching him. Nico arranged this entire defense entirely in the dark. He said absolutely nothing to me. No grand orders shouted across the mansion. And most critically, he gave Bianca zero room to make a single move. Looking back on those frantic hours, I finally understood it in my bones. I knew exactly why ruthless men in this brutal underworld went cold at the name Nico Bellini. His rage was never a loud tantrum. It was dead quiet, like a suppressed rifle aimed right at the weakest nerve. At exactly 9 o'clock, heavy boots echoed. A towering Mafia enforcer pushed the door open, barking the order. The boss wants Sophie in the library. Alone, my legs nearly gave out walking down that endless hall. That room always smelled of permanent danger. I pushed the heavy oak door open. The oppressive air hit instantly. Old leather, Cuban cigars, and the metallic chill of irreversible decisions. Nico stood by the massive window like a shadow, staring into the pitch-black night. His custom suit jacket was tossed on the sofa. His white shirt sleeves were shoved up his forearms. The tense muscles exposed a man exhausted by some violent internal storm. Terrified, I stepped inside. He did not turn. In the dim brass light, 3 items sat perfectly aligned on the mahogany desk. A black smartphone, a metal voice recorder, and a secretly taken photograph of Luca in his backpack. Seeing that photo, I finally understood. For absolute security, every phone in the Bellini estate recorded both sides of the call. A man raised on blood never trusts human memory. In Nico's reality, only hard proof matters. That little metal recorder was a ruthless judge. It had captured every single calculating word Bianca uttered in this house. But even knowing the threat was over, seeing Luca's photo made my stomach violently turn. My son, I choked out. My voice was barely a whisper. He is completely safe now, Nico replied. His tone was perfectly flat. Forcing that much rage under ice only made him infinitely more terrifying. I swear to you, no one will touch him. My knees buckled. I gripped a velvet chair just to stay upright. So I trembled. You heard everything. Only then did the boss finally turn to face me. He stepped into the light. What I saw rattled my core. This was not a boss enraged by a cheating fiancé. This was the shattered face of a son. A man who thought he ruled everything, only to realize his voiceless mother suffered brutal torture right behind her own door. He looked gutted, torn between crushing guilt and blinding rage. What I heard was enough to understand the whole filthy truth. He rasped. Shame burned my cheeks. I should have told you sooner, I whispered. He offered absolutely no comfort. Yes, he answered coldly. That word stung. My silence made me an accomplice. His jaw clamped tight enough to crack teeth. But that vicious woman knew exactly where your little boy waited every afternoon, Nico added, no arrogant judgment in his voice, just a grim understanding of survival. I stared at the Persian rug, still shaking from the terror of almost losing Luca. Any mother facing that threat would fold. You had no choice, he said, his deep voice echoed, offering a heavy forgiveness. A suffocating silence stretched between us. I braced for questions about Bianca's plans. I was totally wrong when he spoke. His voice actually broke. Tell me, how long has my mother lived in fear of that woman? Tears flooded my eyes. Since the very first day. I choked out. Nico flinched like he took a bullet. And I noticed nothing, he breathed. I stood paralyzed in the heavy silence of that vast room. I did not know what to say. Nico turned back to me. His dark eyes were demanding, yet somehow not unkind. He told me to spill everything, and heaven help me I did, but not all at once. Truth buried under cold fear never comes out clean. It spills in jagged pieces, full of desperate pauses, dripping with the unbearable shame of things that were never your fault. I told him exactly how Bianca maliciously dragged the writing board right out of his mother's reach, about the venomous whispers she poured directly into Donna Elena's ears. I confessed how Bianca twisted things, making everyone wonder if Donna Elena was just losing her mind. I told him about the ominous black sedan idling outside Luca's elementary school, a silent threat parked right at the edge of my life. I described the predatory way Bianca watched me, how her eyes cut into me every single time I translated that board. Through it all, Nico listened like a statue carved from shadow. He never interrupted my frantic words. The crime boss only broke his stillness one time. It happened when I admitted Bianca had called Donna Elena completely useless. His massive hand clamped the mahogany desk, gripping it so fiercely, his knuckles turned bone white. Why didn't my mother write these things down? His voice was rough, heavy with devastating grief. I swallowed hard. I told him Bianca never left her alone with the board if he was near. Remembering those trapped moments made my chest ache. Whenever Donna Elena desperately tried to spell it out, someone always managed to interrupt. The air in the room violently shifted. Nico's dark eyes turned pitch black. Someone, he repeated slowly. I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. The head housekeeper, sometimes Bianca's assistants. I honestly believed she had help inside this house. Very slowly, Nico turned his gaze back to the small recorder on his desk. She does, he finally said. That absolute certainty turned the room to ice. My breath caught. You know who they are. Not all of them, Nico replied, his jaw tight. Not yet. He reached across the desk and picked up the photograph of Luca. Gently, he placed it face down. He knew it terrified me, seeing my boy inside this dangerous room. That black car outside your son's school belongs to Bianca's cousin, he told me. He paused, his face hardening into pure ruthlessness. My men picked him up 20 minutes ago. I swallowed hard. Picked up, I echoed. My mind raced through a dozen terrifying possibilities. Nico locked those piercing eyes onto mine, pinning me right in place. He will never go near your son again, he promised softly. I didn't dare ask what that meant. Inside Nico Bellini's dark empire, some answers are much safer left unspoken. I gripped my dress to steady my hands. What do you want from me? I whispered the truth. He answered instantly. Tomorrow evening, right in front of everyone. Panic hit me so hard, I nearly stumbled backward. You want me to expose her at the blessing dinner? I gasped. I want my mother to speak, he corrected. His deep voice broke, softening painfully on that single word, mother. I want her to speak through you. However she chooses, he said quietly, but only if she truly wants to. That one sentence shifted something massive inside my chest. Bianca had coldly exploited Donna Elena's tragic silence for her own gain. Nico was patiently asking that silence for permission. The contrast was staggering. I took a deep breath, finding a tiny spark of bravery. She will want to do it, I told him firmly. But you have to understand, Bianca will absolutely expect my total obedience when that moment actually arrives. Then let her blindly expect it, Nico replied. His face was a dead mask of authority. I stared at him, trying to comprehend the sheer risk. You want her to truly believe she still holds total control over me, I clarified. He answered smoothly. That is incredibly dangerous. I warned, my pulse hammering against my ribs. I know, he agreed. I thought of my little boy. Dangerous for my son, I pushed back. The ice in his expression shifted instantly, softening into something remarkably fierce. Your boy is strictly under my protection now. Not as some casual favor, as a sacred debt, I blinked. Completely confused. A debt, I asked. You protected my mother when I entirely failed to see she needed it, he confessed. I simply did not know how to answer that. He walked silently to the heavy oak door. His hand paused on the brass handle. Sophia, he murmured. I slowly looked up, meeting his heavy gaze across the quiet room. The next time you are afraid for your son, you come directly to me, he instructed. His tone left absolutely no room for argument. You do not carry that kind of terror alone, while living in my house. God, I wanted so desperately to believe him, to finally feel safe. But genuine trust is never just a door that swings open, simply because some powerful mafia boss demands it. Trust is a rusted, complicated lock. It desperately needs time to turn. So I just gave a silent nod, standing there paralyzed in that overwhelming moment. It was the only thing I could manage to do. That long night, I curled up on a narrow velvet sofa right beside the bed in Donna Elena's massive room. I knew Luca was safely guarded now, but bone-deep fear does not magically evaporate just because the immediate danger shifts out of sight. It stubbornly settles right into your marrow. Waits in the dark, the older woman tossed and turned, slept terribly, twice during those quiet midnight hours. She woke up completely, reaching a trembling hand toward her wooden board. The first time, her shaky letters spelled out 2 words, Luca safe. I leaned over and softly told her yes. He was perfectly safe hours later. She reached for the pen a second time. Moonlight caught the deep worry etched into her face. She slowly wrote Nico angry. I sat there in the dim moonlight. I thought about the intimidating man standing in the library earlier, remembered his tightly controlled voice, those unexpectedly wounded eyes. Yes, I whispered to her, but he is certainly not angry at you. Donna Elena lay perfectly still. She stared up at the intricate plaster ceiling for what felt like an absolute eternity. Finally, she grabbed the pen again, carefully wrote down 3 words. My son blind. A tiny bitter laugh caught in my throat. I almost smiled, but the sheer, crushing sadness, radiating from her dark eyes immediately shut that down. I tried to defend him softly. He was only trying to trust the woman he was supposed to marry. I gently reminded her. Donna Elena did not agree at all. She simply tapped the heavy wooden board one single time. No, that sharp tap echoed in the quiet room. Then her frail fingers rose to touch the heavy silver cross resting against her collarbone. She slowly spelled out someone is lying. I swallowed the thick lump in my throat and nodded. Yes, I whispered back, Bianca was lying. Donna Elena's fragile fingers tightened aggressively around the pen. With deliberate, painful strokes, she wrote. I warned. Hot, stinging tears instantly burned my eyes. I know, I answered thickly. She turned her head on the silk pillow and looked deeply into my soul. Meeting that heavy gaze, I suddenly understood the horrifying depth of what she actually meant. She was not only talking about Bianca. Years ago, long before the brutal attack that completely stole her voice and hearing, she had desperately warned this crime family about another smiling, treacherous woman. Another hidden threat that cruelly came dressed in the beautiful disguise of love. And tragically, no one had listened to her back then either. Now that exact same dark history had arrogantly returned to the Bellini estate. This time it wore expensive diamonds and called itself a blushing bride. The very next morning, Friday, October 18th, the massive stone mansion woke up with the frantic energy of a grand theater stage just hours before a deadly performance. Flocks of nervous florists arrived well before sunrise, hauling massive towers of white roses. Stressed caterers rushed back and forth, carrying gleaming silver trays through the discreet side doors. Outside, heavily armed security guards stood with grim faces. They methodically checked every single guest name on the list twice over. Bianca floated gracefully through the absolute chaos in a stunning, pale cream dress. Her beautiful face was completely calm again, her dark hair pinned up perfectly. She looked entirely angelic, acted exactly as if she hadn't maliciously threatened the life of a small child just one day prior. When she finally pushed open the heavy door to Donna Elena's quiet room, I was standing there, gently brushing the old woman's silver hair. Bianca paused near the threshold, her cold eyes locked directly onto mine through the reflection in the large vanity mirror. "How is little Luca?" she asked softly. Her tone dripped with a sickening, fake sweetness. The heavy wooden brush abruptly stopped moving. My trembling hand completely froze in midair. In the mirror, Donna Elena's eyes sharpened into twin points of steel. "He is safe," I answered. I fought hard to keep my breathing perfectly steady. Bianca's flawless smile flickered for a fraction of a second, just long enough to reveal the monster hiding beneath the surface. "For now," she taunted softly. "Safe," I repeated. I pushed that single word back at her like a heavy stone. And this time, there was a dark, unyielding strength vibrating in my voice. A fierce defiance I had never once allowed her to hear before. Bianca tilted her head, studying my face. She was certainly clever enough to sense the subtle shift in the room, but she was entirely too arrogant to believe my fear wouldn't return the exact second she needed to use it against me. Slowly, Bianca glided across the carpet to where Donna Elena sat. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on the fragile woman's shoulder. Donna Elena did not flinch, did not blink. She simply turned to stone. "Tonight will be an absolutely beautiful evening," Bianca murmured smoothly. Her grip tightened just a fraction. "All you have to do is sit there looking lovely and let Sophia speak for you." Without looking up, Donna Elena slowly lifted her trembling hand, brought it down hard, tapping just once on the wooden arm of her velvet chair. No, Bianca's dark eyes flashed dangerously. The polite facade slipped just enough to show her genuine hatred. "Still so remarkably stubborn." "I see," the bride hissed quietly. I slowly placed the heavy silver hairbrush down on the vanity. "She needs rest before dinner." I turned to face the woman who had terrorized us. Bianca whipped around, her expensive dress swishing sharply. "Do not ever forget your place in this house, Sophia." The threat hung incredibly heavy in the air. I met her furious glare in the mirror. "Oh, I know exactly what my place is." For the first time, the untouchable Bianca Rossetti actually hesitated. The crack in her flawless mask lasted only a second, but I definitely caught it. After years of reading silent cues, 1 second was plenty, right at noon. Nico quietly entered his mother's room. Thank God Bianca wasn't trailing him. He looked totally wrecked. Dark shadows beneath his eyes proved he hadn't slept. Donna Elena watched her powerful son approach. He sank to his knees right in front of her, didn't speak, just pressed her frail hand fiercely to his forehead, bowing in complete submission. Her fingers trembled against his skin. Nico squeezed his eyes shut, fighting back the crushing agony. "Mama," his voice was absolutely raw. "I am so deeply sorry." She stared down at the weeping crime boss. The room held its breath. He swallowed hard, the words bled out like a confession. "I should have seen this. I should have listened. Tonight, nobody speaks for you without an order. Not Sophia, not me." He glanced at me by the door, asking if he could try. I handed him the board, with shocking gentleness. The killer set it across his mother's lap. Donna Elena gripped the marker. Her knuckles turned white. Shaking violently, she dragged the ink across the surface. Not Sophia's fault. Nico read it, the stoic mask finally cracked open. "I know," he whispered, his throat thick. Donna Elena dragged the pen again. "Boy safe?" Nico nodded. "Yes." "Luca is safe." She let out a shuddering breath, eyes closing in pure relief. Then she gathered herself. She wrote one last name, Bianca. All the sorrow vanished from Nico's face, replaced by dead stone. "Tonight," he promised. She tapped the board twice. Yes, long after the heavy door clicked shut, I realized I was crying. Donna Elena caught my tears. 2 quick taps on the board. I looked up to see 2 simple words. "Thank you." A ragged laugh tore out of my throat. "You are thanking me right now. You are the one saving us." She just shook her head. Her shaking hand aimed the pen at me, then at her own chest. Finally, she pointed at the door Nico just walked through. Together, she never wrote it. That silent promise echoed all afternoon. Together. For years, I survived alone, standing by myself the night Marco walked out forever. Totally isolated, bringing fragile Luca home. Just me against the crushing bills. Or monsters like Bianca threatening my blood. I built a fortress, yet today, deep inside the deadliest Mafia compound in the city, a voiceless old woman tore those walls down. She proved that real courage does not mean fighting in the dark. It means unclenching your fists and letting someone stand beside you. By nightfall, the stone mansion twisted into a dark fairy tale. 1,000 candles lit the sprawling dining hall. Tables groaned under heavy white linen. Gold plates caught the glare of crystal chandeliers overhead. Broad-shouldered men in sharp suits stood frozen along the walls. They played the part of festive guests well enough, but everyone knew the truth. They were heavily armed guards. Mob wives in tight silk dresses traded venomous whispers over crystal glasses. The entire Bellini syndicate flew in to witness this sacred blessing. Bianca's ambitious relatives swarmed the room with smiles that stretched way too wide. You could catch them, side-eyeing the Renaissance art, the Italian marble, the gilded ceilings. Their hungry eyes already calculating the empire they prayed she would inherit. My stomach tied into knots. I stayed glued to Donna Elena's wheelchair as we pushed into that suffocating banquet hall. The old boss wore deep navy. A heavy silver cross rested against her fragile collarbone. The worn alphabet board sat squarely on her lap. Suddenly, the chaotic room slammed into silence. Nico filled the doorway, pitch-black suit, zero polite smiles for his guests. He offered no softness to the cartel until his eyes found his mother, and a brief warmth flared. Bianca timed her entrance for dead last. She swept in dripping in ivory silk. So unnervingly beautiful, it almost wiped your memory. A face like that made it entirely too easy to forget about loaded guns. Like a cartel queen taking her throne, she glided across the marble straight to Nico. A highly possessive hand slid over his sleeve. "Tonight is absolutely perfect," she whispered loud enough for the room. Dripping with arrogant pride, Nico stared at those manicured fingers, then dragged his dead eyes to her face. Almost his voice was entirely hollow. Drunk on victory, the bride missed the lethal warning, vibrating underneath. The dinner kicked off. Crystal chimed in endless toasts. Bianca played her sick role flawlessly. Sweet laughs right on cue. Perfect modesty. Whenever the mob wives threw a compliment. Twice during that suffocating meal, she locked eyes with me, a deeply smug glare, reminding me exactly whose life she still held hostage. I stared back exactly once. The cold defiance in my face gave her the only answer she needed. Down at the end of the table, plates were cleared. Nico stood up. Instantly, the hall went terrifyingly dead. Chairs stopped scraping. Every boss held his breath. Eyes snapped to the front. "My family knows why we are gathered tonight." He started out completely calm, yet that gravelly voice sliced the room, a razor blade wrapped in heavy velvet. Nico announced that his mother must give her official blessing. Without her consent, there is no marriage. Bianca kept smiling, though her knuckles went bone white around her wine glass. Nico shifted his gaze to Donna Elena. "Mama," he murmured. I stepped closer to the velvet chair. My heart slammed so hard I tasted blood. Across the table, Bianca's predatory eyes pinned me down. That terrifying threat about my little boy still burned. Right there in her stare. "Do exactly what I said. Make her say yes." Bianca's threat rang in my skull. Nico left his place of honor, stopping before his frail mother. The tension was nearly unbearable. "Do you officially bless my marriage to Bianca Rossetti?" The room waited in suffocating silence. Donna Elena slowly turned her gaze toward Bianca. For the first time all night, that arrogant smile trembled. Then the fading queen looked up at me. Shaking, I stepped from the shadows. I set the alphabet board on her lap and handed her the heavy black pen. Donna Elena gripped the pen. Her fragile hand shook badly. For one terrible second, I feared her strength would break before she could write the words. Bianca saw the struggle and struck like a snake. "The poor dear is just so terribly tired," she interrupted with a practiced laugh. "This grand excitement is simply way too much tonight. I am sure Sophia can just translate for us." "Can't you, Sophia?" She purred the words, eyes flashing with triumphant venom. Instantly, every face in the hall turned to stare directly at me. The trap snapped shut. My mouth went bone dry. I had pictured this moment since dawn. But imagination is a coward compared to a room of armed mobsters. Sharp shadows cut across the table. Bianca waited for me to finally surrender. "Sophia knows Donna Elena better than anyone," she said, dripping with poisonous honey. "Tell them." I ignored her entirely. Turning back to Donna Elena, she sat like a fading queen in the chaos. Her shadowed eyes locked onto mine, completely steady, unbearably tired, and devastatingly trusting. My eyes found Nico. The boss sat like a carved statue. No sharp commands, no pressure, just a single, barely visible nod shifting the choice entirely onto me. I drew a jagged breath. "Donna Elena will speak for herself," I announced. A restless murmur swept the guests. Bianca's painted smile vanished. "Do not be dramatic," she hissed, panic finally bleeding through. She can barely hold the pen. Nico leaned into the light. "Then we will wait," he said. Just 2 words spoken like an executioner. The hall fell into suffocating silence. At the center of it all, Donna Elena forced the heavy pen against the board. With agonizing effort, she dragged the tip across the wood. The first word formed, "No." A gasp cut the quiet. Bianca lunged forward. Silk rustling. She is confused. The old woman ignored her. Her shaking hand scratched out a final judgment. "No blessing. Bianca hurt me. Sophia protected me." The stillness shattered. Chaos erupted. Heavy chairs scraped against marble. Dozens of voices clashed. Bianca went ghost white, then a violent red. "This is a barefaced lie," she snapped, aiming a manicured finger right at my chest. "That maid wrote it. She has been deliberately turning your mother against me for months." The wild accusation hung in the charged air. I braced for the Mafia family to tear me apart, but Nico never even glanced my way. His cold dark eyes stayed locked on his fiancée. "Is that what you want to say?" he asked, terrifyingly quiet, totally empty of emotion. Sensing the ground collapsing beneath her, Bianca shifted tactics. She pivoted toward him and started her calculated performance. Heavy, crystal tears spilled over her lashes, tragic tears engineered to drop a man to his knees. "Nico, my darling, please," she begged softly. "Your mother is deeply unwell," she pleaded, her voice trembling with perfect, fake sorrow. "Sophia has been controlling every single thing in this room. She despises me, Nico. She knows the moment you marry me, she loses all her pathetic little power in this house." Leaning against the wall, listening to her spin this story, I finally saw the terrifying architecture of her plan. This was no desperate improvisation. She had rehearsed this exact speech in front of a mirror long before tonight, a flawless trap. If Donna Elena somehow found the strength to refuse, Bianca would just blame the maid. If I spoke the truth, she would label me a jealous servant. And if Nico showed any doubt at all, she would cower safely behind his mother's fading mind. Brilliant, ruthless, almost completely bulletproof. But for all her ruthless calculating, the bride-to-be missed one crucial detail, the phone hiding in my apron pocket. Moving with the slow grace of an executioner, Nico raised one hand. A towering guard stepped straight out of the shadows. He gently set a small black speaker right in the center of the table. Blood instantly drained from Bianca's face. She looked like a marble corpse, eyes stretched wide with raw terror. "Nico," she whispered, barely louder than a ghost. He did not blink. He just reached out and pressed play. Static crackled in the dead silence. Then her own sharp, arrogant voice echoed off the high ceiling. The recording was crystal clear. It said the next evening, when Nico asks for her blessing, you will make her say yes. That recorded demand hung over the dining room, like a falling guillotine blade. "You are her voice," the recording sneered. "If you say she accepts me, Nico will believe you." The air in the hall practically turned to ice. Everyone at the table froze, completely trapped in the headlights of total disaster, and the audio just kept rolling. Through the speaker, my own voice sounded tiny and terrified. I told her Donna Elena would refuse. Then came Bianca's reply, echoing colder than the silver carving knives on the table. She told me to translate differently, or my son would never come home from school. The mention of my little boy hung heavy in the air, a fatal miscalculation. Threatening a child in this underworld was a line you never, ever cross. I watched the faces of these hardened Mafia men change in an absolute instant. An older woman at the far end of the table cried out, pressing a hand over her mouth, in absolute horror. One of Bianca's hot-headed brothers violently shoved his chair back to stand, but a massive guard stepped directly out of the shadows. He planted a heavy hand on the boy's shoulder before he could take a single step. Trapped. Bianca could only stare at the small black speaker like it was a coiled snake. The cruel, damning audio played on, entirely unbothered by her rising panic. Her final, arrogant words washed over the stunned crowd. "You are a servant, I am his fiancée." And the old cripple cannot speak. Click. With a single emotionless press of his finger, Nico killed the playback. The silence that rushed back into the room felt thick enough to choke on. The trap had snapped shut. She was bleeding out right in front of everyone. Terrifying silence followed the click. This wasn't the quiet of a paused conversation. It was the suffocating stillness of an impending execution, the kind that completely alters the physical pressure of a room. Bianca's frantic eyes darted across hostile faces as the harsh realization hit. No amount of beauty could save her from her own recorded voice. Desperately, she tried to claw her way out. She sobbed that she was just angry, that she did not mean it, that I had provoked her. The crime boss did not even twitch. His face was cold stone. "You threatened a child," he said, his voice terrifyingly flat. She shrieked that she was highly emotional, gripping the edge of the table. "You abused my mother," he replied, sealing her fate forever. Bianca shook her head, dark hair plastered to her wet face. She begged Nico to listen, swore she only did it out of love. Then came the sound. Donna Elena tapped her pen against the writing board. Exactly once, a single sharp crack. No, that tiny noise cut through the heavy air louder than any scream. Nico looked at his frail mother. Then he turned his dead eyes back to the bride. "My mother heard the rod inside you, long before I did," he said. Bianca stopped crying. The delicate weeping just vanished. The victim routine was over. Her mask had shattered completely. Now came the ugly, gasping sobs of a cornered animal. She choked out the excuse she only did it because she was terrified of losing him. Nico took one deliberate step closer. He towered over her. "You never had me," he murmured. She flinched. Backward, like he had backhanded her across the jaw. He reached out and grabbed her left hand. Slowly, he pulled the massive diamond off her trembling finger. No shouting, no cruelty, just crushing. Absolute finality. Watching him strip the ring away. Every guest in that room finally understood. The boss was entirely out of mercy. Weeping wouldn't buy her a thing. "Take her out," he commanded. He turned his back entirely. Bianca let out a blood-curdling scream. Not a plea, a raw animal shriek of pure rage. Guards surged from the shadows. Heavy boots thudded hard against the marble floor. Her relatives shouted, surging forward. Nico's men ruthlessly closed, ranks a solid wall of tailored suits and muscle. 2 guards clamped onto Bianca's arms, dragging her backward toward the massive double doors. She thrust a manicured finger directly at my face. "You ruined everything," she shrieked, her voice tearing. I gripped Donna Elena's wheelchair with a sweaty hand. My knees shook violently, but I refused to step back. I told her no. My voice echoed up to the vaulted ceiling. "Shockingly steady, you did." Her venomous eyes burned into mine, promising 1,000 different deaths. She held that stare until the heavy oak doors slammed shut. With the bride gone, the grand dining hall completely fell apart. Panicked guests huddled tight, whispering feverishly. Bianca's furious relatives screamed at the security men blocking their path. Down the table, Nico's older uncle slammed his fist down. He demanded answers for this public disgrace. Someone in the crossfire muttered, "The night was over." Another guest hissed about calling the cops. But the head of the family ignored the deafening noise. Slowly, his invisible armor fell away. Nico sank to his knees on the cold marble floor, right in the middle of the chaotic hall, fully exposed to his surviving family, dangerous allies and hidden enemies. He reached forward, taking his mother's frail hands between his calloused palms. "Mama," he whispered, for the first time since I met him. His deep voice cracked under the crushing weight of guilt. "Forgive me." Donna Elena stared down at her ruined son. The silence stretched on forever. Then, drawing on whatever strength she had left, she lifted one shaking hand. She rested, her withered palm against the stubble of his cheek. At the touch of her skin, Nico squeezed his eyes shut. His broad shoulders collapsed inward. In that split second, the fearsome Don was gone. He was just a lost boy begging for a profound mercy he absolutely did not deserve. Slowly, Donna Elena tapped her fingers against his face. Exactly twice, yes. Forgiveness in her paralyzed world was never loud. 2 fragile taps from a battered hand that had suffered unimaginable agony and still chose love. A hard lump burned tight in my throat. I looked down at the floor. Some human moments are far too raw to witness, even when they happen right in the dead center of a roaring room. Way past midnight, the guests were gone. The mansion sank into heavy silence. I found Nico standing alone in the dim corridor outside his mother's room. Jacket gone, tie loose, his dark eyes locked on the mahogany door. I stopped nearby, whispering she was finally asleep. He gave a slow nod, asking softly if Rosa had Luca. I told him, yes, the kid ate too much chocolate cake, then politely asked the guards if all Mafia estates serve better food than our apartment. For the first time all night, the iron tension in his jaw actually broke. He almost smiled, but the ghost of it vanished instantly, completely swallowed by guilt. He murmured that he owed my boy a deep apology for bringing danger to our door. I shook my head, told him Luca didn't know enough about the world to need one. Nico turned to me, his dark gaze piercing the shadows. He said children always know more than we think. I swallowed hard, knowing he was absolutely right. My legs finally gave out. I leaned heavily against the wall, utterly crushed by the night's gravity. The boss studied my pale face. "You need to rest," he ordered softly. A dry, hollow sound escaped my throat. I whispered that I honestly didn't think my body remembered how to sleep. Silence stretched comfortably between us in the dark. "You were incredibly brave tonight," he finally said. I shook my head, rejecting it instantly. No way. I was completely terrified. He stepped closer, murmuring that bravery is never the absence of fear. The fading adrenaline made me reckless. I told him that sounds exactly like a line rich men use when poor women take the actual risks. He froze, stared right down at me, for one terrifying second. I knew I had pushed the Mafia boss way too far, but no anger flashed in his eyes. He just exhaled and looked down at the rug. "You are completely right," he confessed. The raw defeat in his voice genuinely shocked me. Untouchable men like Nico Bellini do not admit when a maid is right, but watching him stand there, I finally understood his darkest contradiction. Absolute power made him a monster on the streets, but profound grief left massive, bleeding cracks in his armor, and through those exact fractures, Donna Elena could still reach in and find the desperate little boy he used to be. It was a beautiful, tragic kind of ruin. What exactly happens to Bianca now? I couldn't stop the question from spilling out. He answered smoothly, "She will leave the city before sunrise." I frowned. That is it. His eyes instantly hardened into black stone. "No, but it is all the truth you ever need to carry." I slowly nodded. I didn't drop it because I loved his brutal methods. I dropped it because a mother knows better than to drag bloody mafioso secrets to her kid's breakfast table. I swallowed my rising panic and asked about the men she hired. "Gone," he recalled absolute. Nico added that the guy lurking near Luca's school was very eager to give them names. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. "Did you hurt him?" I asked, completely terrified of what he might say. Nico just stared at me. Pure, absolute darkness swirled in his eyes. He said he made absolutely sure the man understood that children are never weapons. I didn't dare ask a single thing else. His dead tone was enough. When the sun finally rose, my sweet Luca woke up in a lavish Mafia guest suite, twice the size of our old apartment. I pushed open the heavy oak door. He sat swallowed by a massive feather bed, chewing dry toast, glaring suspiciously at the ornate silver tray on his lap. "Mama," he mumbled through a mouthful of bread, scanning the velvet-draped room. "Are we suddenly rich now?" I burst out laughing for the first time, in what felt like a lifetime. "No, my sweet boy," I told him. "We really aren't rich." He pointed a sticky finger at the extravagant breakfast spread. "Then why is the yellow butter hiding inside a fancy little bowl?" I gently tapped his nose. "Because very wealthy people are secretly terrified of using normal plates." He erupted into giggles. That innocent sound finally loosened the iron knot gripping my chest. But then his round face grew incredibly solemn. "Did the bad lady go away?" he whispered. I sighed, sinking heavily onto the mattress right beside him. "Yes, baby, she went far away." He chewed on his bottom lip, asking if it was because of the scary tall man. I shook my head, tightly squeezing his small hand. "No, Luca, because of the truth." He paused, his little brow furrowing. "Can the truth really make all the bad people go away?" he asked with this profound, crushing hope. I brushed a curl from his forehead. "Sometimes it can," I murmured. "But the truth usually needs brave people to say it out loud." He searched my tired eyes. "Were you brave, Mama?" I looked down at my son, the one child I chose over every single safe path. "I really tried to be," I whispered, satisfied. He just leaned his weight against my side. "I think you were brave," he declared, biting hard into his toast. That simple judgment was almost enough to heal my battered soul. In the quiet, hollow days following the ruined dinner, the Bellini mansion slowly changed. Donna Elena's writing board was never again moved out of her reach. A fresh board sat waiting in every single room she occupied. The biggest shift came when Nico hired a high-end medical specialist. The doctor wasn't there to replace me. He came to teach the entire staff basic hand signs. Nico made absolutely sure his paralyzed mother would never again depend on one single person just to be heard. They scrubbed the rot from the estate. The senior housekeeper, who helped Bianca intercept Donna Elena's messages, vanished without a trace at midnight. 2 guards who looked the other way got instantly replaced. His men brutally uprooted every single one of Bianca's imported flowers. Her massive oil portrait completely disappeared before breakfast. But the biggest shift was Nico himself. He stopped pacing the halls like a caged predator. He stopped looming over his mother to casually ask if she was all right, as if a woman trapped inside a failing body had a simple answer, that the Don was finally looking past his own ego. Instead of rushing, the feared Mafia boss sat in that quiet room. He just waited over long afternoons. He learned the critical difference between 1 sharp pen tap and 2. He studied her heavy eyelids, figuring out that a dark glance toward the oak door meant absolute privacy. He realized pressing her knuckles to her silver cross meant someone was lying. I will never forget the first time he perfectly understood her command without looking to me for a translation. Donna Elena's lips twitched into a fragile smile, barely visible in the dim light. Yet that tiny curve completely transformed Nico's hardened face, washing away years of buried agony. Watching them from the shadows, I finally saw the truth. Profound love is not always proven by violent, grand gestures or cinematic acts of vengeance. Sometimes it just means taking the time to learn a silent, broken language no one else cared about. But despite the fragile peace settling over the dark house, I had quietly decided to pack my bags and leave. Cowardly, maybe. But cold terror does not magically disappear just because one single enemy is gone. This beautiful stone mansion had very nearly cost me the life of my only son. The blinding gravitational pull of Nico's violent empire almost dragged my innocent Luca directly into a bloody underworld, the exact life I spent 8 years desperately running away from. The only survivable move was to collect my pay, thank Donna Elena, and just vanish. I needed menial work somewhere completely ordinary, a boring place without towering iron gates, armed men, or calculating women like Bianca. I went to the old matriarch first. She sat perfectly still, listening to my confession, with her writing board resting on her lap. I told her my Luca needed a life of peace. And honestly, I desperately needed it too. My voice trembled. She stared for a long time before picking up her pen. Slowly, she scratched out a question you leave because afraid. I looked at the board, just gave her a sad, tired smile. Yes, she wrote, carving the letters deep into the wood. Good mother afraid. The room held its breath as she paused. Then she wrote, but do not let fear choose whole life. I had no answer to give her, truly nothing. The words hung in the stillness like quiet devastation. Later that afternoon, under a bruised, purple sky, Nico asked to speak with me out in the garden. It was my first time walking those grounds without the grinding weight of pushing Donna Elena's heavy chair. The roses were trimmed with violent precision. The paths swept far too clean. Yet the air out there finally felt breathable. Nico stood like a shadow beside the marble fountain, dressed entirely in black mourning, a life he never really chose. Yet his usual brutal coldness was completely gone. He noted his mother said I wanted to leave. I replied that she reads too much, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. She reads correctly, he murmured. I looked toward the towering main house. I told him this place was not safe for Luca, and never was, he countered, his jaw tight, claiming it was safer now. Because you say so, I asked, challenging the very foundation of his power. The silence stretched between us, thick and unresolved. He refused to offer an empty answer. I actually respected that lingering pause. He finally confessed he should have made it safe before, and failed. The admission was a bleeding cut on his immense pride. I folded my arms tightly, completely defensive against the raw honesty in those dark eyes. I told him plainly I was not asking for his guilt. He knew that, I added. I wasn't staying just because he felt responsible, either. Good. That single word yanked my gaze right to his face. Daylight caught the exhausted angles of his cheekbones. Stay only if the work still matters, he said. Only if his mother matters. Stay only if you believe your son can be safe inside these walls. If not, he would arrange work far away, under another name if necessary, with full pay, until I was completely settled. I stood in the shifting sunlight, staring at a man who traded in fear, suddenly offering me total liberation. Why, the question just slipped out. He looked away, his profile stark against the stone. He said his mother was alive in ways he simply missed, all because of me. A sudden ache hit my chest. She was always alive, I whispered back, defending the quiet ghost haunting the upper floors. Yes, he agreed, the word barely a ragged breath. He would regret that blind spot for the rest of his days. That bleeding honesty absolutely shook me. It unsettled me far more than any ruthless command ever could. I had spent my entire life navigating dangerous men who used threats to buy obedience. But Nico was desperately trying to avoid that. I watched his tense shoulders, suppressed violence, completely tamed by sheer sorrow. And what if I do stay? I finally asked him. His eyes locked onto mine, fierce. Then you stay as Donna Elena's sworn advocate, he said. Not a nameless servant the crime family can just push around. You stand above them. No one enters her room without explicit permission, he declared, mapping out the borders of our new world. No one touches her board. No one speaks over her. You answer to her first. And then to me. Those terms shifted the tectonic plates of the entire estate's hierarchy. And Luca, I demanded, my protective terror instantly flaring. A private car takes him to school. Nico shot back. A distant guard ensures he never feels hunted. I cover every single drop of his asthma medicine. His life remains his own. The sheer scale of his protection felt completely suffocating and beautiful. All at once I looked up, searching for the trap. I warned him. I absolutely would not have my son raised like a Bellini. My voice trembled with fierce desperation. For a fleeting second, something dangerously close to warmth thawed his dark eyes. He called it the single wisest thing anyone had ever said inside this cursed house. I turned away, staring hard at the swept stones. Completely terrified I might actually smile. I whispered that I needed time. Take it, he offered softly. In the end I stayed, not because the terrifying Don Bellini asked, not because this blood-stained mansion suddenly turned into a fairy tale. I stayed because that very evening, Donna Elena reached out her frail arm, tapped twice on her board, and placed her trembling palm right over my hand. Yes, stay. That simple command grounded me right in the eye of the storm. I also stayed for Luca, later that night. He wandered down to the cavernous kitchen. He discovered the terrifying head cook would actually make him chocolate pancakes just for saying please. Sitting there, my son declared. The mansion was scary but highly interesting. It was the most brutally honest description anyone had ever given this dark fortress. We settled into a strange, cautious rhythm as the cold weeks dragged on. The estate slowly absorbed its own shockwaves. Countless months passed in tense quiet. Finally, the frightened servants and wealthy guests stopped whispering the ruined name of Bianca in those shadowed hallways. Bianca's untouchable family watched their empire burn almost overnight. The very same men drinking Barolo at her table suddenly played dumb, claiming they never really trusted her anyway. That is exactly how heavyweights weather a scandal. They just rewrite history before anyone can ask a single question. A cowardly, brilliant disappearing act. But inside the Bellini mansion, nobody forgot the ugly reality. The trauma hung in the dark corridors like stale smoke. Donna Elena felt the knife in her back. I remembered the absolute terror, and Nico sat with his quiet rage, refusing to forget a single detail. I remembered, and so did Nico. On dead afternoons, when the mansion felt like a sleeping volcano, I caught him frozen in his mother's doorway, just a quiet shadow. He watched her slowly pen her thoughts. He studied her making choices, marveling when she waved away a glass of water, simply because she finally had the power to say no. You could see this heavy, ancient ache in his eyes, bitter grief for the decades stolen from them. But right beside that pain burned an intense gratitude. He almost tied his life to a complete monster. A woman who looked at his mother's forced silence and saw nothing but pathetic weakness. He finally realized she was never a victim. Dead silence hides a truth far sharper and infinitely more dangerous than any panic scream. Our fragile connection did not burst into some cinematic romance overnight. It started with simple, heavy respect, a currency so rare in a crime family. It might as well be gold. Nico respected how unflinchingly I spoke to his mother. I treated her like a true Mafia queen, not just a lingering ghost. In return, I respected his sudden, quiet patience. He stepped back. He never rushed Donna Elena's slow answers again, completely letting her dictate the exact rhythm of their world. He respected that I never stroked his ego, and I respected him by actually listening, even when my honest words caused him discomfort. Slowly, cautious trust took root where raw fear had thrived. The shift was subtle, but totally impossible to ignore. Some mornings, Nico walked Luca out to the waiting car. He would adjust his dark coat, pretending he just had urgent business outside. A fragile, wonderfully transparent lie. In return, my fearless son started asking the intimidating Mafia, done completely reckless. Innocent questions no adult would ever dare ask. Do Mafia bosses eat cereal? Do you wear black every single day? Are you secretly afraid of my mama? Nico stopped, considering that last question for a very long pause. A little, he finally confessed. Completely deadpan, Luca collapsed, laughing hysterically. I bit my lip hard to hold it back, but utterly failed. The sound just escaped me. It was the first time Nico heard me laugh, without that heavy anchor of fear weighing it down. He turned. He looked at me like that noise was the most precious thing he had ever witnessed. I immediately stared at the ground. Certain quiet looks are infinitely more dangerous than a spoken threat. Winter arrived with creeping softness, blanketing the estate's violent history in pristine white snow. While the sprawling city grew bitterly cold, the mansion interior inexplicably became warmer. It glowed with roaring hearth fires and a strange, fragile peace. Donna Elena spent her afternoons in the grand sitting room. Luca did his homework by her frosty window, completely unfazed as she ruthlessly corrected his grammar, with slow pen taps, noticeably. Nico began returning home from his dark affairs much earlier. Initially, I firmly convinced myself he was rushing back solely for his healing mother. Then one twilight evening, I found him lingering silently in the doorway. He watched Luca passionately explain a messy school drawing to Donna Elena, slowly sensing my presence. Nico shifted his dark eyes to me. The look he gave was devastatingly quiet, painfully honest, not the predatory hunger of a mob boss, not ruthless possession. Nothing at all like the transactional devotion Bianca had desperately wanted. It was something infinitely gentler, stripping away all my carefully built defenses, and precisely because it was so gentle, it terrified me far more than a loaded gun ever could. I had spent my entire fractured life furiously running from any love that demanded a bloody sacrifice, or a piece of my soul. I simply didn't know what to do with a love that just stood patiently at the threshold, holding its breath, waiting for my explicit permission to enter. It felt like standing on the very edge of a beautiful, terrifying cliff. As the bitter winter began to thaw, Donna Elena made an unexpected demand. She wanted a formal dinner in the exact same cavernous hall where Bianca's vicious lies had been exposed. A chill ran down my spine. I thought it was an utterly disastrous idea. Nico completely agreed with me, but Donna Elena possessed a silent, immovable stubbornness, a regal, iron-willed determination that somehow forced both the terrifying Don Bellini and a fiercely protective mother to quietly bow their heads and obey. A very small dinner, Nico stipulated, trying hard to set a firm boundary. Donna Elena looked at him and tapped twice on her board. Yes, absolutely no outside guests, I added, crossing my arms. She moved her pen and tapped twice again. Yes, and no long speeches. Luca chimed in with utter seriousness. Donna Elena slowly turned her piercing gaze to my son. She let the heavy silence build, then firmly tapped once. No. Luca let out a dramatic groan. Speeches are so boring. Slowly, elegantly, the matriarch lifted a single, devastating eyebrow. Luca immediately snapped his spine perfectly straight. It was incredible to witness. Even entirely stripped of her physical voice, Donna Elena could effortlessly dominate. A room far better than any shouting Mafia boss. Friday night, rain streaking the glass. We were not there to toast some toxic Mafia engagement or broker a backroom Underworld deal. No flexing power. We just sat there, this fragile, strange family pulled right out of the ashes of a dead lie. No fake, smiling guests tonight. No Bianca dripping in stolen diamonds. No rival crime families quietly pricing the marble columns. This massive table held only a fiercely guarded few. Nico, Donna Elena, my sweet Luca, Rosa the terrifying cook who somehow became my son's best friend, 2 older Bellini relatives who actually cared about the matriarch, and finally, sitting right there among them as a total equal, there was me. The grand dining hall felt profoundly different, without that suffocating stench of fear choking the room. The tall wax candles still burned. The crystal chandeliers still cut sharp light right through the shadows. Plates still lined with heavy gold, but the vast space no longer felt like a cold, theatrical stage built for a usurper's ruthless ambition. For the very first time since I stepped foot in this estate, the mansion actually felt like a home, desperately trying to remember how to be warm. Donna Elena sat like royalty in a sweeping gown of oceanic blue. Her face held a deep calm, carrying the heavy weight of survived wars. As I stepped behind her and clasped a silver cross around her fragile neck, I stepped back, and she caught my eye in the reflection of the antique silver mirror. She raised her pen, deliberately tapped her board twice. Beautiful, a real smile found my lips. You are, I whispered, and I meant every single syllable. Instantly, the sharp crack of her pen hit the wood. One tap, no then, with sudden fierce intensity. She raised a shaking finger and pointed straight at my reflection. I looked down immediately. My cheeks burned hot. Naked praise always made me want to crawl right out of my own skin. Poor, desperate women like me are trained from birth to be useful, never beautiful. We survive by fading into the wallpaper. But Donna Elena saw right through that armor. That quiet woman understood, way too much, about the wounded human heart. Under the crystal dining room light, Luca talked more boldly than anyone else. He stared the terrifying Don right in the eye, complaining that Rosa put way too much butter in the potatoes, and then demanded a second helping anyway. He proudly told Donna Elena, his strict teacher, thought his handwriting was finally getting better. The matriarch tapped twice on her board. She looked exactly like a benevolent queen granting royal approval. Nico just sat back in his heavy chair. He watched the kids' endless energy with deeply guarded, quiet amusement, and every so often, cutting straight through the warm haze of the candlelight, those dark, dangerous eyes would slowly drift from my young son and lock intensely onto mine across the table. Every time his eyes caught mine, the heat flared. I always broke the stare first. The hours dissolved into a soft blur. Then, right near the end of dinner, Donna Elena slapped her frail palm hard against the polished wood. Dead silence. Nico leaned in. The relaxed boss instantly vanished into a coiled spring. He snapped her name, his voice jagged with worry. She just pointed at her writing board. My pulse hammered as I slid the slate across the table. Instead of writing, she shoved the silver pen straight at Nico. He frowned, totally lost by the silent order. The matriarch tapped twice. She jabbed a finger at the empty velvet chair beside him. Then she aimed that exact same finger directly at me. Panic fluttered like a trapped bird inside my chest. My heart slammed hard against my ribs. I begged Donna Elena under my breath, trying to outrun the avalanche before it completely buried me. She completely ignored the plea. Her face was set in stone. She snatched the pen back and finally started to write. I could only watch, caught somewhere between horror and awe. Her hand was miraculously steadier now than the night Bianca lost her entire empire. Slowly, fiercely, she carved every single letter into the board like a law of nature. She wrote a sentence that sucked the oxygen right out of the room. It was a terrifying, irreversible decree. She wanted her son to marry Sophia, provided Sophia made the choice freely. For one agonizing minute, sound simply ceased to exist. I heard absolutely nothing. Not the candle flames, not the silver plates, not even Luca taking a sharp breath right beside me. My skin burned. I whispered Donna Elena's name like a frantic prayer, begging her to stop. Nico did not move an inch. He sat completely frozen. His dark eyes locked on to those devastating words, then slowly lifted to face the woman who raised him. "Mama," he breathed, Donna Elena just held the ruthless Dawn in her steady gaze. She carried the absolute stillness of a matriarch who outlived vicious street wars, brutal lies, and years of suffocating silence. She had walked right through the fire, and she still knew exactly what the unvarnished truth looked like. Without flinching, she lowered her pen and wrote again. The harsh scrape of metal on wood was deafening. Not servant, not debt family. I watched Nico swallow hard. Slowly, the Mafia boss turned his head and looked right at me. For the very first time, there was no order burning in his eyes. No heavy expectation, no arrogance demanding my total surrender. There was just naked shock, a heartbreaking tenderness, and an emotion he had spent months refusing to say out loud. He spoke my name, Sophia. His voice cracked quietly in the dark hall. Raw, wide open. He told me I did not have to give him an answer tonight. An unexpected, stunning offering of pure mercy. That one gentle sentence really should have made the crushing weight in the room a little easier to carry. Instead, that sudden mercy made it so much worse. His gentleness was a blade twisting right in my ribs. It proved he understood the single tragic thing I feared most. I had spent my entire adult life being chosen only when I had something to give. I was perfectly useful to Marco right up until Luca was born and ruined his selfish plans. Rich families gladly took my labor until my wrecked spine and cracked hands could not scrub their marble floors anymore. I was even needed at this terrifying Bellini mansion. Just because I had the patience to translate a voiceless woman nobody else wanted to understand. For my entire life, my worth had been brutally chained to whatever I could do for other people. But looking at me across that candlelit table, Nico Bellini was not asking me to serve his dark empire. In a brutal criminal world built entirely on absolute control, this dangerous Don was taking a step back. He was giving me the terrifying space to actually choose, snapping the trance. Donna Elena shoved the wooden board toward my shaking hands. I stared down, the harsh letters blurring together. Another deliberate line sat right below the first. My son needs a fearless woman who tells him the truth, she had written. Sophia needs a man who will never make her abandon her child. A devastating, beautiful prophecy. Beside me, the heavy wood chair creaked. Luca looked up at me, his eyes impossibly wide. Somehow, his young mind felt the tectonic shift happening in that room. Mama, he whispered into the thick silence. Mama, Luca whispered, his small voice floating right over the gold-rimmed plates. Is she asking if Don Nico can be my new dad? In that split second, the suffocating tension in the room just shattered. I slapped a trembling hand over my mouth, fighting hard to keep it together. A choked noise escaped anyway. A broken laugh smashed right into a sob. The terrifying mob boss slowly turned his head to look at my son. For the very first time since I walked into this cursed estate, the untouchable Don Bellini looked entirely, paralyzingly afraid of an 8-year-old kid. He swallowed hard. His dangerous eyes were stripped completely bare of their heavy armor. Only if your mother wanted that, Nico finally answered. And only if you wanted it too, Luca countered, his little face deadly serious. He examined the feared crime boss with the ruthless scrutiny only a child has. Would I have to wear black all the time? He asked. Nico actually blinked. The lethal edge in his stare melted into pure confusion. Over by the heavy drapes, Rosa quickly disguised a bursting laugh as a harsh cough. I shut my eyes, feeling the sudden heat of the room on my skin. Nico finally told him no. Luca kept pushing. Could Mama still tell you when you are wrong? Nico went soft. He said I already do. Luca held his ground. Would Nonna Elena live with us? He demanded, at the head of the oak table. Donna Elena brought her frail hand down. She tapped twice, hitting so hard the wooden board jumped. Yes. Luca gave a firm nod, handling the moment like a high-stakes mafia negotiation. Then I think maybe it is okay, he concluded. A ripple of warm laughter moved right through the shadows, breaking the fever in the room. Even Nico let out a quiet chuckle, but my chest just felt hollow. I could not fake a smile. The golden candlelight blurred as hot tears filled my eyes. I looked over at Donna Elena, the powerful matriarch locked in her own silence. You are asking way too much, I whispered, my voice barely cutting through the heavy air. She held my gaze with absolute clarity. She tapped the board once. No, her shaking fingers slowly dragged across the letters, spelling out the real truth. I am giving a blessing before asking anything. Your choice, always your choice. Wood scraped stone as Nico stood. He rounded the massive oak table, halting at the edge of the candlelight. He kept a deliberate distance, treating that empty space like a sacred boundary. A silent request for permission. Sophia, he murmured, his voice was raw, far more broken than I had ever heard. He told me his mother is bold. That absurd understatement caught me entirely off guard. A jagged laugh tore out, slicing right through my tears. I looked from the fearsome Dawn to the frail woman, sitting perfectly still. Your mother is dangerous, I told him. My voice shook. At the head of the table, Donna Elena lifted her hand. She tapped the wood twice, yes. A faint smile touched his lips before fading into haunted gravity. Shadows clung to his face. He wouldn't pretend to deserve me, just because his mother said so. Every word carried the crushing weight of his past. He wouldn't pretend his world was simple. It was a nightmare, blood on his hands, enemies in the dark, sins he could never scrub clean. A name that made innocent men freeze in terror. He stopped, his dark eyes locked onto mine, stripping away the ruthless boss. But I also have a mother, he said softly. She taught me that love without listening is just pride. And you taught me that too, he whispered. The confession hung heavy in the grand dining hall. I was entirely paralyzed by the raw heat in his stare. I couldn't look away. He took half a step closer, amber light catching the rigid line of his jaw. He told me he didn't want me as a nurse. He didn't want me because I saved his family, or to settle some massive debt. His chest hitched with a ragged breath. I want you, because you walked into this freezing house and saw the people everyone else missed. You saw my mother trapped in the dark. You saw me. You looked straight at a monster, and saw a man even when I did absolutely nothing to earn it. He swallowed hard. The vulnerability practically suffocated him. If one day I ever saw a life beside him, he said, he would spend every remaining second proving that neither I nor Luca would ever stand alone again. The silence following that promise was absolute, heavy with terrifying gravity. Nobody dared speak. Even Luca sat perfectly still, his small hands gripping the table edge. I stood completely frozen in the dim haze of the room, studying this notorious Mafia boss. The ruthless ghost the entire city feared in the dead of night stood right in front of me, looking like a ruined man, begging for absolute mercy. I pulled my gaze from his and looked at Donna Elena. This fragile woman had once been buried alive inside her own silence. Yet she somehow used that exact silence to drag us toward the blazing truth. I turned to look down at Luca, my ultimate promise, the actual beating of my own heart, the child I chose over every easier path life offered. The air felt impossibly thick as I finally found my voice. I told Nico I had spent years refusing any love that asked me to give up my son. The words trembled with fiercely guarded independence. Nico didn't blink, his dark eyes locked endlessly onto mine. He vowed he would never ask that. I told him I would never move into this sprawling mansion, just to be a charity case. My chin lifted, a defensive fire ignited right in my chest. Never, and if I ever say yes, it won't be because Donna Elena commanded it, not because he protected Luca when the shadows came, or out of pure gratitude. Nico stepped closer. His heavy presence overwhelmed the space. He countered, then say yes, only if it is because you want me. His voice was a dark velvet plea. My hands began trembling violently, completely betraying my projected calm. Donna Elena watched, her tired eyes brimming with tears. Beside me, Luca quietly slipped his small, warm hand right into mine. I closed my eyes, pulling in a deep, shaking breath. Then not one day, I told him softly. The words hung like a struck match. Tonight. The ruthless mask of the boss completely shattered. Nico's face changed instantly, not with arrogant triumph, but with a raw, desperate disbelief so beautifully tender it physically ached. Sophia, he breathed a pure prayer on his lips. Yes, I whispered, but slowly, with absolute truth, with Luca, with your mother, with zero dark secrets kept out of my reach. In the corner. Donna Elena's hand came down hard on the table. She tapped twice, then again, and again, beating a frantic rhythm of sheer joy, until every single person in that dim room laughed blindly, through heavy tears. The distance between us collapsed, as Nico stepped forward. He moved deliberately, through the candlelight, slowly enough that I could have easily retreated. I didn't move an inch, reaching out. He took my trembling hand. He didn't hold me like a powerful boss, used to taking whatever he desired. He held me like a ruined man, receiving a miracle he had absolutely no right to demand. He bowed his head, pressing warm lips to my cold fingers. The room's heavy atmosphere seemed to exhale all at once. Then a loud groan shattered the spell. Luca scrunched his nose in total disgust, asking if he really had to watch this. By the heavy curtains, Rosa threw her head back and laughed openly. The joyful sound rang freely through the massive house. A sharp crack rang out. Donna Elena tapped her board once, fixing a stern gaze right on Luca. No, with a rigid finger, she pointed strictly at his half-eaten slice of cake. The boy understood immediately, shrugging. He abandoned the grown-up drama and happily went back to his dessert. Nico slowly lifted his dark, heavy gaze back to mine. For the first time since I stepped into this sprawling mansion, I didn't look away. I knew the stark reality of our choice. There was still a terrifying amount of danger, waiting just outside those stone walls. Faceless enemies still plotted in the dark. There would undoubtedly be bitterly hard mornings to survive. We would still live heavily protected behind guarded iron gates, forever dragging a mountain of old, bleeding guilt. He carried deep wounds etched right into his soul, scars that love alone could never fully erase, no matter how fiercely I tried. But looking around that softly lit room, I saw the miracles we had somehow forged from the dark. At the table sat a matriarch, a woman who incredibly found her stolen voice through a wooden board and violently trembling fingers. Across from her sat a small boy, a kid who gained an entire family without losing his own mother in the crossfire. And standing right before me was a terrifying Mafia boss, a man who finally learned the agonizing lesson that immense power means absolutely nothing if you cannot hear the quiet voices of the people you love. And at the very center of it all, standing calmly in the warm glow of the chandelier, was me, Sophia, the quiet caretaker who walked into this dangerous mansion solely to protect another woman's silenced voice. Somehow, I miraculously found my own strength waiting in the dark. Shifting from pure survival to an actual life felt like a beautiful dream. Months later, the afternoon sun spilled across the manicured lawns. Out in the lush gardens behind the estate, Nico slid a diamond ring onto my trembling finger. The air smelled intensely of blooming jasmine. Sitting upright in the front row, Donna Elena looked like a reigning queen in elegant blue silk. Right by her side stood my son, Luca. His small hands gripped his grandmother's wooden writing board tightly against his chest. He clutched that heavy wood with the fierce, protective pride of a royal guard securing a sacred document. The ceremony was beautifully private. No crowds of false allies plotting our downfall. No rival crime families lurking in the background, hungry for power, and thankfully, no vengeful woman in white, pretending to love a man she only wanted to possess. The shadows of the underworld were totally barred from the gates. Instead, we had golden sunlight, the scent of red roses, and a handful of deeply trusted friends. Then Luca broke the quiet peace. He whispered far too loudly from his seat, begging me not to cry. His childish voice echoed across the tranquil garden, warning me my face would look really funny in the pictures. I let out a shaking, joyful laugh. Staring at the family I had fought so hard to keep, I let the hot tears fall anyway. A deep laugh vibrated quietly in Nico's chest. He reached up with a scarred hand, gently wiping a stray tear from my cheek. The sheer tenderness of the feared boss prompted Donna Elena to loudly tap her board twice in smug approval. When the priest formally asked the gathering for their blessings, the matriarch proudly lifted the wooden board onto her lap. Nico and I both turned fully toward her, honoring her presence. The garden went completely still as her frail hand began to move. She dragged her finger across the worn wood deliberately, making absolutely certain every single spelled-out letter landed with piercing clarity in the bright afternoon air. Family is who fiercely protects your voice. She carefully dictated to us when the rest of the cold world refuses to hear you. Overcome with reverence, Nico silently bowed his dark head. I reached down and gripped Luca's small hand, anchoring myself to the present moment. From her wheelchair, Donna Elena brought her knuckles down, tapping the wood twice. Yes, right there in the sunlight. That was exactly how our dark story ended. Not defined by the violent fall of Bianca, not concluding with the explosive anger of a mafia boss, or the paralyzing fear of a forgotten phone call. Instead, it closed with a brave woman who couldn't speak, offering a pure blessing to a fractured family that finally learned to listen. Yet even now, when the massive estate gets quiet and the world sleeps, my mind still wanders back to that one fateful phone call. The streets always whispered that the cunning Bianca fell, simply because she carelessly forgot to hang up a receiver. I know that is not the actual truth. Bianca was completely destroyed because she arrogantly looked at the world and believed silence always meant weakness. She figured a lowly caretaker could be easily bullied into burying the bloody truth. She thought a paralyzed mother with no physical voice was just a ghost, someone to be casually swept aside. Worst of all, she deeply believed an innocent child could be used as a pawn for her own leverage. She figured absolutely no one in this dark city would ever force her to pay the toll. She was dead wrong about every single one of us. Donna Elena physically could not speak a word, but she gripped a piece of wood and loudly smashed it against tyranny. I was deeply terrified, just a nurse bleeding in a room full of wolves. But I planted my feet and told the absolute truth. Nico was impossibly powerful. A boss used to blind obedience. Yet he swallowed his dark pride and finally listened. Luca was only a child, but his steady stare reminded the broken adults why true courage actually mattered. And the wicked Bianca, who desperately wanted a bloody throne, ended up losing absolutely everything. Reduced to nothing because one phone line stayed connected just long enough for poetic justice to catch the ugly monster she really was. I looked down at the heavy diamond shining on my hand. My name is Sophia Bellini now. It feels like another lifetime when I was just the invisible caretaker, haunting Nico's cold, sprawling mansion, just the hired help carrying tea, painstakingly translating the trembling hands of a paralyzed mafia mother. But through all the blood and cordite, I learned something real. Even the quietest voice in the room holds the raw power to shatter a criminal empire, once it is finally heard. And sometimes the weary woman hired to protect a stolen voice miraculously finds a fiercely loyal family, an unbreakable fortress, and a deep, consuming love she never once thought that this brutal underworld would ever let her keep.